This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and
Election
Paul
time.
Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Michael Barr carrying the brunt of the news flow today. It is election day across the nation. We're fired up. Great show yesterday, I thought, Paul, with Ann Seltzer was her Iowa storm. Over the weekend, have Bob Woodward stop by. We continue strong today. Gautam Mukunda will be with us as well. Your insight, Paul, here at 701 Election Day.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when we're going to get some resolution here. But let's get through the day here. Let's get a nice, quiet day. Everybody get their vote counted, and then we'll figure out where we go from there. Maybe is it later tonight? Is it tomorrow? Or a couple days? We'll see. We're
going to try to do it a little different, folks, with some smart conversation on the broader themes. David Gura will join us in moments. He's ensconced in Philadelphia. We'll go national with David Gura here this morning. Romaine Bostic will be with us as well in Detroit, Michigan, Wisconsin, important. Minnesota's, I guess Minnesota's sort of Harris, but, the Northwest there, they got a mind of their own.
They do. I mean, there's those swing states that we've all been reading about and been told about.
I've been reading.
And we'll pay attention to all that as well. So, a busy day here. We've got some smart people going to help us kind of get through it. Yeah,
and all I can say, folks, is Paul and I have been reading in. Thank you, Greg Giroux of Bloomberg Government for Wisdom, the crew over at Cook Political Report. It's Muskegon County.
Oh, boy.
Ken Pruitt used to fish there.
Yeah.
That's a key county. Muskegon County. It's north of Grand Rapids. They way to Chicago.
That's north.
Kalamazoo and all that. But it's Muskegon County's one we're focused on. What we're going to do is do a little bit of data as well. The markets, as you can well imagine, churning on this election day. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa.
Yeah, and we've got NASDAQ futures kind of leading the charge this morning. They're up about 0.4%, 80 points. Dow futures up about 0.1%, 61 points, and S&P futures up about 0.2% or 14 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.17%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.31%. That's up 2 basis points. I want to check in with currencies. We have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen weaker. We have euro, British pound stronger. Bitcoin up more than 2.5% at around 68,000. U.S. ETFs investing in Bitcoin recorded their highest daily net outflow to date. Shares of Boeing checking in there up nearly 2%. Workers voted to accept that new labor contract, ending the strike. It's affected the jetliner production for 53 days. And today's Wells Fargo, it's expected to begin its first ever contract negotiations between a giant U.S. bank and unionized employees. It's going to take place at a branch in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And shares of Palantir up 13%. The company boosted full year profit sales forecast. Big there. Strong U.S. demand for its AI software. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
I thought of Dan Ives.
I did too.
A single best idea. He says Palantir, and you correctly said what?
Exactly. All I know is he said this is his AI trade, and boy, has he been right on that one too.
He's been right in a lot. I was looking at Apple Computer, and they had Mr. Buffet selling his shares out. And I guess the stock, since he began selling, I don't have the date in front of me, folks, but it's close. Apple's up 38% since Mr. Buffet started selling.
And it's been a lot of stock he's been selling, too. It's amazing how that stock can power through when you got a huge seller out there in the marketplace.
Isn't it great to do economics, finance, investment instead of election day?
The old stuff. I mean, we got, as Lisa was just reporting, out a little bit of a lift to the market here. People tentative here.
Who are we leaning on? I won't mince words. Michael Barr tomorrow morning with extended coverage, particularly good morning to 99.1 FM in Washington, 92.9 in Boston and New England, but particularly and truly a battleground tri-state area is Bloomberg 1130 in New York. We say good morning to all of you in Connecticut, New Jersey, in New York, dare I say Delaware as well. And the basic idea here is there's some key races. Mr. Lawler's name continues to come up north of New York City, but some, it's not just Michigan. Listen to me.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, Michigan.
Exactly.
It's 7:04 a.m., folks. Imagine what I'll be like at 6 o'clock tonight. But Paul, seriously, this is a battleground region in the greater New York area.
It is
for the House.
For the House, exactly right. And we talk about the White House, but again, a lot of the smart political money out there is taking a look at what's happening at the House and the Senate level. And the question is, will there be a wave one way or the other, or will it be kind of deadlocked?
Joining us now from Philadelphia with a national view, because that is always his perspective, David Gura joins us, driving all of our political coverage. And, of course, The Big Take is a podcast he's familiar with. David, the span here is Dixville Notch, 4,400 miles to the Aleutian Islands. EDAC is west of Hawaii. They will vote last. Do we have any sense of presidential outcome, Senate outcome, or House outcome before that last vote is made in the Aleutian Islands?
Tom, there's a lot of cautious optimism, as you might expect, but there are whisperings that, we could know the result of some of these battleground states, rather the projection of the outcome of some of these battleground states a bit earlier in the evening. It really is anyone's guess. I spent the bulk of last night just off of Ben Franklin Parkway here in Philadelphia at the Kamala Harris rally, and I said cautious optimism a moment ago. There was so much of that, and really the emphasis was on how important each vote is going to be, how the finish line is in sight, but they're not over it yet. So I think people are proceeding cautiously here, really emphasizing the fact on both sides here that they've got to make sure that every vote is counted and that, indeed everybody gets to the polls here on Election Day.
You led me to Maricopa County, Arizona. 61% of the vote in Arizona is that greatest Phoenix area. I think Wasserman over at Cook lays it out beautifully. McCain Republicans in Scottsdale, college students in Tempe went to the debate there years ago. LDS voters, the Mormons in East Valley. David, what can you say about Maricopa County, 10 o'clock tonight?
I think that's something we're going to be watching extremely closely, especially in light of what happened last time. That, of course, was at the very heart of that crucible over allegations that there might have been malfeasance in the last election. Of course, those were false allegations, but we've seen the preparation that Arizona has been doing to sort of forestall those allegations this time around. But you mentioned the kind of role of the McCain-style Republican, and I think that what the Harris campaign has done very effectively here over these last many months is make overtures to those Republicans, try to get them on their side. There's been a really concerted effort on the part of Democrats, on the part of the vice president, to bring over some of those who would be disillusioned with the former president of the United States. But as you talk through all this demographics, Tom, I think what you're hitting on, the fact is that each of them matter. It's not as though this is going to be won or lost based on older voters or younger voters. Right. The coalition is going to be diverse and multifaceted, and that's certainly what both of these candidates are trying to fashion together here in the last remaining hours.
David, where will each of the candidates be this evening as results do come in?
Well, Donald Trump, after his final rally in Grand Rapids, Michigan last night, which ended about 2 a.m. Eastern time, made his way down to Florida. He's going to be at Mar-a-Lago, his club in South Florida, as those results come in. Kamala Harris is returning to her alma mater. She's going to be in D.C. at Howard University for a big event there. So we'll have people at both of those places, of course, as those results come in. But that's where they'll be ensconced as they await the outcomes of all these votes.
Let's do a 2020. We can do look back with David Gura. I mean, we can do 2020 hindsight. That's in the folks. Look for the new show, 2020 hindsight, with David Gura in 2025. Should Shapiro have been of Pennsylvania? Should he have been the VP candidate versus Walz of Minnesota?
Look, this is going to be the question for Monday morning quarterback. And, of course, a lot depends on what the outcome of this race is. But Governor Shapiro spoke last night at that big rally in Philadelphia and got a huge ovation, a ton of applause from the audience that had been gathered there, and certainly spoke to what the Harris campaign wants, which is for all Pennsylvanians to get to the polls today. Look, this is a critical state for both of these candidates as they look at that 270 vote in the Electoral College. Pennsylvania is key. If Kamala Harris doesn't get it, there's going to be no shortage of people who say, look, you should have picked the guy who carried this state despite all odds, and maybe he could have brought it home for you. But again, we'll see what happens later tonight, tomorrow, in the days that follow.
One final question, and I know, David, you've canoed up in Maine, Richardson Lake up by Rangeley. Have you been to Dixville Notch, David Gura?
I've not, but of course I follow this with great interest. I mean, this was kind of a gimmick to begin with. This was it wasn't really a town. Took place at this hotel in New Hampshire. The hotel isn't there anymore. It's not really a real town, as I saw in the Times this morning. But you had 6 people show up at the crack of dawn. It's not even the crack of dawn. At midnight last night to cast their ballots, and it was an even split, 3-3, 3 for Trump, three for Harris. The gimmick continues, but I do appreciate the sort of the wonderful quaintness of having something like that to kick off what's going to be a marathon day as we wait for those votes to come in.
Now, David, at 2 a.m. this morning, we expect your interpretation of the results from the Aleutian Islands. David Gurr, Philadelphia. He'll be with us all through the day on Bloomberg. Right now, let's get to it. Futures up 11 with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Election day is here. Yesterday, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump made their final push in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
This is that big, powerful, vicious party. No, it's a vicious machine. I mean, they can take all these bad ideas and win elections. It's like there's only way you could do that. One way. There's only one way.
Pittsburgh, we are not going back. We're not going back.
Harris campaigned in Allentown, Scranton, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. Trump also campaigned in North Carolina and Michigan. There are also some high-profile ballot measures up for a vote across the country. 10 states have pro-abortion rights items on the ballot, including Arizona, Florida, Nevada, Maryland, and New York. Nebraska has an anti-abortion measure up for a vote. 4 states will consider legalizing marijuana. That measure is on the ballot in Florida, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Increases to the minimum wage are on the ballot in California, Massachusetts, Alaska, and Arizona. Colorado has a measure on guns seeking to add a 6.5% tax on firearms and ammunition. And in Arizona, immigration is on the ballot with an item giving local law enforcement agencies authority to detain and deport undocumented border crossers. Officials have been preparing for months to keep poll workers safe on this election day. In Durham County, North Carolina, they have new safeguards in place. The elections director says they implemented de-escalation alert badges for all of their chief judges and site coordinators to wear. Derek Bowen says if they press the button, it immediately connects to 911.
Election officials are your neighbors and friends here to defend democracy. Our county has made significant investment for our protection given the rhetoric and the actual events and threats against election officials.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr leading our coverage, particularly extended Michael Barr tomorrow morning with all the propositions and ballots. A nice focus there on what we're seeing around Bloomberg 1130, but Michael Barr with a national view tomorrow morning. Join us for complete coverage. U.S. election results. We start at 5 p.m. tonight. Joe Matthew, Katie Lines, 2-hour edition of Balance of Power, and then joining John Farrow and Anne-Marie Harden at 7 p.m. Live election results and analysis. Context tonight on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and our podcasts on YouTube as well. Sure. Thank you for the perspective on YouTube. Michael Barr, you subscribed to our YouTube podcast this month, didn't you? I saw that come across the transom.
Yeah, I just signed up. I said, man, I am late to the party.
I don't know if you know this, folks. Michael Barr is part of the battleground state, Pennsylvania. Do the deer have placards on the side of them?
I've got a deer that's like an ornament in my front yard. Just lies there
Harris
every
or Trump
time.
placard on the side.
Some placard, more like "Don't hit me."
It's interesting, and we'll of course see from Pennsylvania David Gurr there. As you know, Paul, say something about the markets. The markets.
Yeah, we're lifting it a little bit here. We got the S&P up 12 points. We'll stick right there. It's going to be a quiet day.
We'll have to see. It is election day. Stay with us.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around-the-clock. All right, we've got a slight lift to the markets as the voting gets underway. A tight race between Donald Trump, Kamala Harris for the U.S. presidency. Shares of Trump Media Technology, they're up about 9%. To the markets we go. NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 74 points. Dow futures, little change up about 37 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or about 11 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.18%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.31%. That's up 2 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.5% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude at $71 a barrel. We have spot gold at $2,741 an ounce. To earnings we go. Yum Brands includes KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. Sales there, well, they fell more than expected in the third quarter. Taco Bell just not able to offset that continued weakness at Pizza Hut and KFC. Its shares down 1%. Meanwhile, Restaurant Brands International, that's the owner of Burger King and Tim Hortons, posted sales that grew a little bit slower than expected in the third quarter. Its shares down 2%. Then you have DuPont up 2%, raised its earnings guidance for the year, and this is after volume gains in the third quarter led to higher sales and profit. And finally, Apollo Global Management up 4%. Assets reached $733 billion, and that was thanks to a push from those wealthy clients. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
So, Lisa, we're going to talk. I mean, you got to vote today, and I know you're going to do a write-in. Do you realize you have to spell the name of your write-in candidate correctly? It's Dwayne, D-W-A-Y-N-E.
Johnson?
Okay. Dwayne, but you got to spell it correctly, or the vote doesn't count. She's on the rock.
Yeah, exactly.
Dwayne Johnson, we say good morning to all. The celebrities have been out in droves.
They have
particularly
been,
for Vice President Harris.
Yeah.
And Mr. Trump has his, the Hulk is out there as well. Right now, what we're going to do is look at economics, finance, investment, and particularly your investment perspective off of the election. Eric Friedman gives us wonderful, wonderful perspective right now with U.S. Bank Asset Management. Eric, I know you're going to say look beyond the election. That's what bank, wealth management types say. I get it. But in what way do we look beyond the election?
Yeah, Tom, I think the biggest thing is that we have to see what variables may actually upset the corporate profit cycle, which we still think is strong. We're at 240 for this year in terms of S&P operating earnings, 270 for next year. So a pretty robust growth environment. So I think that what would cause election noise to actually really matter, number one, would be a change in the cost of capital. Again, the thing that CFOs have to think about is, where am I going to be borrowing? And will we see inflationary policies that actually cause the bond vigilantes to come out and perhaps upset some of that corporate profit cycle party that we're expecting? That would be issue number one. Issue number two would be if the consumer really starts to retrench. Without question, we're seeing some lower income consumers, if you will, retrench, but middle income, upper income consumers are still hanging in there. Those would be the two factors that we think could upset the corporate profit cycle. But again, we're still optimistic. We think you either have to be neutral or a little bit overweight equities here. That's our position through what will be a very loud couple days here.
I mean, Paul, if I go from Halloween of 2012, and I look out to say 2013, this is the Romney election where he went down in flames. And the answer is it was a moonshot the first week of December up, and then a constructive trading range across all of 2013. Was anybody talking on that on election day of 2012? I don't think so.
I don't know. So Eric, I mean, given that earnings outlook that you talked about, 240 this year, 270 next year, what does that do to your valuation call here? I mean, there's a lot of folks that are very nervous about valuation here.
Yeah, Paul, congrats to your Devils with a good opener last night. That was exciting.
Maine fight Bears, I guess.
That's right. That's right. My son was at the game. He actually caught a T-shirt, so he actually claimed it. Though he's not going to give it to me. I made him go to his mother.
Wait, is this Duke basketball talk on election day?
They opened their season last night.
Next year they're going to play Colgate, right?
Yes, exactly.
The powerhouse.
Exactly.
Is there anybody on Colgate over 6 feet?
I don't
think
know.
so.
just the training staff. No, I think. Ultimately, I think, Paul, what this means for us from a valuation standpoint is that we think that there's probably a little bit of multiple compression for next year. We think that, again, probably getting to like a 24, 23 times type of number is probably appropriate based on the idea that the consumer is going to slow down. We think gradually, but from a valuation standpoint, we're still at the upper end of fair, if you will, but we don't think that we're necessarily overvalued. One of the key things we're focused on right now is the idea that we're actually seeing a broadening out of participation, not just across sectors that are maybe a little more consumer sensitive, but also real estate, which we can't emphasize enough. The fact that real estate is hanging in there and actually credit and equity are doing well, that's something that we think is a real positive. So if anything, we think valuation probably takes a very slight hit next year, maybe a turn and a half on a multiple basis, but not massively because, again, we think earnings growth will be so robust.
Eric, on the fixed income side here, we've had yields move higher here. What are we doing on the fixed income space? Are we taking credit risk at this point?
Yeah, we think fair value, Paul, for the 10-year is about 4%. So it's actually at a level that's becoming a little more interesting to us tactically, but we still think that credit remains underloved and underappreciated. Even though the spreads are historically a little bit tight at the upper end of investment grade, if you look at the lower end of investment grade and the upper end of high yield, we think there's stuff to do, if you will. And I think that ultimately, one of the things that is very entrenched in clients' minds right now is the idea of getting cash flow. We've had an environment where, again, a lot of people have been hanging out in cash, and in doing so are used to seeing some yield that come into their portfolios.
Right.
We think enhancing that beyond cash into things like structured credit, things like master limited partnerships, those are things that can be additive for client portfolios.
I just brought up the BAA industrial versus the 10-year spread. This is a value line shtick from like 4 decades ago. 12,
Still works.
12, 15. And it's amazing how the spreads have stayed even with rising yields. Eric, one final question. It's important. Is there an outcome for Mag 7 between a Trump or Harris victory?
Yeah, I think that probably the regulatory trade is one that people are focused on, Tom, which is probably an outlier. The idea that we do see a really a strong shift left, if you will, in terms of both the legislative branch as well as the judiciary branch, as well as the executive branch. So that would probably be, at least from a headline basis, the challenge to Mag 7. I do think that the idea of buybacks in the very near term is a positive for that space. We're kind of running out of time on this calendar year. There's a few CFOs who are behind the schedule a bit. But again, the regulatory pressures would be about the only thing that we could see outside of maybe some retrenchment in corporate CapEx. But that's really not on our base case view right now. So still bullish on tech. We still think it's a spot to be.
Eric, vote early, vote often. Eric Friedman with the U.S. Bank. Thank you so much for a brief there on where investment should be after the first Tuesday of November. There's not enough talk about this. We're all lathered up about the election and all that, and the answer is, okay, but what's it mean? Where are we?
What are we doing?
I just brought up randomly, 2012, I've been looking at Giroux's work and Wasserman's work at Cook, and the answer is we forget, we're so focused on Trump 2016 with Clinton that we forget the election before, where you saw some of these longer term shifts occur, and the one shift is the Dow was a moonshot off December as well. Futures up 9. What's its signal, Paul?
What's its signal? I think people are going to try to just kind of look past today a little bit and focus back on some of the fundamentals for this market.
We should get the strategists from Robinhood.
Sure.
They're probably doing Robinhood trades in the voting line.
Exactly.
I'm kidding.
You can do that.
Lisa, how are we doing over here? It's election day, Lisa. I mean, it's not, it's a different day, isn't it?
It is, but I'm getting ready. I'm going after work, taking my son, taking my kid. Got to get that young vote in
let's
there.
cover this right now.
Yes, the young vote.
This is parent abuse. You're dragging a child who can vote.
Yes.
But he is a member of the U.S. National Guard. I mean, he's an Army dude. He's a dude.
How do you entice him? Is it like a
grab
steak
him.
dinner afterwards?
I say I'm going to buy him lunch.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
That's how you do it.
There we go. Vote early, vote often, and buy lunch for the young ones. We hope you get out to vote today across America. We're with you here, and we'll be with you tomorrow morning. Fascinating what we'll see at 7 a.m. tomorrow. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, Election Day, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures kind of in this wait-and-see approach as the closest U.S. presidential race in modern times gets underway. Polls show Donald Trump, Kamala Harris deadlocked both nationally and across swing states. But there's more to come. Election Day quickly followed by Thursday's Federal Reserve decision on interest rates and Jerome Powell's press conference. Today, we get a report on U.S. trade and the ISM Services Index. Also this week, initial jobless claims, productivity, and a read on sentiment. So right now, NASDAQ futures leading the charge up about 0.2%, 54 points. We have Dow futures little changed, up 29 points. S&P futures up about 0.1%, or 8 points. The two-year yield, 4.18%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.32%. That's up 3 basis points. Shares of telehealth company Hims & Hers, they're up 8% this morning. This is after posting a quarterly profit, raised its annual sales forecast. Weight loss drugs, they're drawing in some new subscribers. And Ford's electric vehicle sales in the U.S., well, it dropped more than 8% in October. Demand for its F-150 Lightning EV pickup slowed. But overall vehicle sales, that soared over 15% last month, and its shares up about 0.5%. And shares of Nintendo down more than 3% in Japan. It slashed its full-year outlook, reporting its 5th straight quarter of profit declines. That was due to falling demand for its Switch console. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. And Lisa, thank you for informing me. She said she insulted me. She said these are the closest elections in modern times. And,
Whoa.
you know, I vaguely remember sitting with my grandfather in 1960, the whole uproar, JFK, Catholic, and, you know, all the rest of it. And I am corrected. You were correct, Lisa, and I was wrong. 1960, the Delta was 118,000 votes. And, you know, through my youth, that was like, you know, Chicago Daily, they stole the vote, Trump, 2 times ago, one was 78,000, less than 118,000 votes. And Biden, 4 years ago, was 43,000. So 118,000 since 1960, 78,000 2 times ago. Biden last time 43,000. Lisa Mateo leading with knowledge you can use
Bring it right in.
Election Day.
Numbers.
This is an important discussion, and Bob Woodward yesterday in her piercing conversation, thanks for the many comments there, particularly from Trump supporters that felt Mr. Woodward was supporting the other team. And to have Tina Fordham with us right now, Fordham Global Insights, is important off what Bob Woodward said yesterday, that the Secretary of Defense of the Biden administration has an affinity for the Vice President of the United States. Tina, as I know you know, in Foreign Affairs magazine, the Secretary of Defense writing, and of course his extreme concern about Ukraine and, quote, Putin's aggression, unquote, the Secretary of Defense goes, "The frauds and falsehoods of the Kremlin apologists." What does the Department of Defense and our foreign policy projection look like with a Trump or Harris victory?
Well, I think we should admit to start with that as we've gotten closer to polling day in the U.S., the sounding the alarm about the risks of Trump in the White House have increased, and the defense secretary is talking about the fact that Trump has said that he would end the war in Ukraine on day one. He hasn't said how he would do that. But what is likely the biggest foreign policy implication in the short term of Trump in the White House has got to be his promised end to military aid to Ukraine. Even though Europe has done a lot and done it quickly in European Union terms, and the UK has been very involved in this, it won't be possible to replace that aid in time. And, Putin's been playing a waiting game when it comes to Ukraine, and he's been much more active when it comes to US elections.
Tina, you're based in London. I'd love to get a sense of kind of what the folks in the UK are thinking about this election, how closely they're paying attention to it. How do they view potential outcomes?
Well, I guess I have a bit of a, self-selected crowd around me. My phone is lighting up constantly today. And in the UK, people feel very close to the United States. And so there's, affinity and concern on that front. And of course, in the markets, our investor clients and corporate clients are really on the edge of their seats about this. It's impossible to position for an election as close as this, as Tom was saying at the start. But there is enormous anxiety, and it's pretty much across the board about what it would mean for the UK and Europe to have Trump back in the White House. And I think there's been less consideration really about what a Harris presidency would mean, apart from the expectation of continuity on NATO, AUKUS, the security umbrella in Asia.
What have you heard, if anything, from some of the European leaders about a potential second Trump presidency in terms of just geopolitics in general? Again, as you mentioned, there's so many hotspots around the world, from the Middle East to Ukraine. What would that mean potentially?
Well, European elected officials will be at great pains not to say anything because, they don't want to be seen to be interfering in the elections. But there has been no secret about the fact that Brussels, for example, has been trying to Trump-proof Europe. And that's the term that's been used. And that relates particularly to security and defense, as mentioned. But I think the other angle here, the obvious one is security and defense, and it matters enormously. But the other angle about why these U.S. elections are being watched so closely and with so much anxiety is simply around the question about whether the U.S. can have a peaceful transition. And I was very interested to see some polling data from the AP that talked about 4 in 10 Americans are concerned about violent interference with elections. That's alarming. So I think the biggest litmus test is the functioning of our institutions and the acquiescence of whoever loses.
Right. One of the great changes here, Tina, from 2016 to 2020 to 2024, way beneath the fold in America, nobody's paying attention, is 96 miles from the Russian border in Finland, Lapland, the United States is leading NATO artillery exercises. That's something I would not have said 4 years ago or 8 years ago. What is the significance of NATO artillery exercises a Cuba away from Putin's border?
That speaks to the fact that we have two new NATO member states since Russia decided to invade Ukraine, and those are Finland and Sweden. It wasn't expected. I suppose even 5 years ago, I actually had a bet with a Swedish banker friend of mine about this, that they would both join. But you take us to an interesting place, Tom, which is that one of the sort of open debates that's underway is whether those Nordic states would kind of form their own mini NATO if U.S. withdraws its support in one form or another. They have strong militaries and have had the mandatory draft. And I think a lot of Americans don't appreciate how prepared those countries are. Finland was at war with Russia, remember, and has a memory of being at war to defend their territory, but they do rely on U.S. participation.
This came up last night at the dining room table. Tina Fordham, if President Trump wins a second term, where does he travel to first? Does he redux his Pacific travels? Does he go to Europe? Will he try to redo 2016?
So I actually haven't thought about that before. I love a thought experiment, Tom, but I don't think that Trump will feel compelled, if he's reelected, to do the traditional calling upon allies. Trump's also not really an ally guy. And if we look at his, campaign statements, they're really focused on the domestic. I mean, my sense is that Trump would likely subcontract his foreign policy, trade policy to experts who he trusts. Of course, the trouble for us is when we try to speculate what that looks like, that most of the people who worked for him before have made it abundantly clear that they would never consider doing so again.
Tina, we got to leave it there. Never enough time. Tina Fordham Global Insight. That's a key issue, Paul. I mean, we've covered this with any number of guests here, Admiral Stavridis among them. Is how do each of these, does Harris just do a Biden redux government?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Does Trump redo 2016, which, Tina Fordham said he can't?
Yeah. If you're a European ally, how do you think about the U.S.? Because you have one party that wants to engage globally and one party that does not. So how do you prepare for that long term?
My anecdote is there was no other topic in Rome here 10 days ago. I will say that with great certitude. Futures up 11 now, up 6. The VIX back at 22.06. On this election day, our news from New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Former President Donald Trump closes out his campaign for the White House in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Over the past 4 years, Americans have suffered one catastrophic failure, betrayal, and humiliation after another.
Trump encouraged his supporters to get out and vote and promised new heights of glory if he were to be reelected. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris wrapped up her whirlwind campaign Monday in Pennsylvania with a stop in Philadelphia.
Every single vote matters. So let me ask you, who here has a plan to vote?
After criticizing President Biden's comment about Trump supporters being garbage, Republican vice presidential nominee Senator J.D. Vance called the vice president trash.
We are going to take out the trash in Washington, D.C., and the trash's name is Kamala Harris.
Vance spoke in Atlanta yesterday. Governor Tim Walz wrapped up the Democratic ticket's message in Detroit last night. The vice presidential nominee said it will be women voters who will win the day.
Women all across America, of every age, both parties, are going to send a loud and clear message to Donald Trump, whether he likes it or not.
There are also some high-profile ballot measures up for a vote across the country. 10 states have pro-abortion rights items on the ballot, including Arizona, Florida, Nevada, Maryland, and New York. Nebraska has an anti-abortion measure up for a vote. 4 states will consider legalizing marijuana: Florida, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Increases to the minimum wage are on the ballot in California, Massachusetts, Alaska, and Arizona. And in Arizona, immigration is on the ballot with an item giving local law enforcement agencies authority to detain and deport undocumented border crossers. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
11 p.m. tonight. You know, Lisa will just be getting home from the bars with his son after he votes.
Yep.
11 p.m. tonight. This is Wasserman over at Cook. California is the epicenter with 5 Republican incumbents all playing, I love this, vigorous defense.
Okay.
You know, it's like sports. We talked about John Duarte the other day, maybe with Gurr, I can't remember. But, I mean, the House could be decided at 11 a.m., but we may not even know the vote counting by then.
No.
11 p.m., excuse me.
Yeah.
11
so we'll
p.m.
see
tonight.
I mean, we'll wake up tomorrow morning. We'll see where we are.
And I was learning about the different. Have you been to Reno? Have you ever been to Reno on the road trip? I've never been to Reno.
Great town.
I've been to Vegas a couple times to do speeches.
Ski in Tahoe, and then you come on down and, you know.
Reno, the differential between Vegas and Reno's become a tech, white college educated magnet.
Yeah,
so its politics are totally different than Las Vegas.
Ton of California people.
Yeah, that's a smarter analysis than me. But that's the kind of thing we're going to be following here. Of course, Greg Giroux with granularity on this in the coming days. But we're going to do more than just look at Harris, Trump, and Harris. We should say here, of course, our election coverage tonight, 5 p.m., no one better than Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lines, and then at 7 p.m., Jonathan Farrow. Amory Horton will join with a cast of thousands. Romaine Bostick in Detroit, David Gura in Pennsylvania. Look for that tonight from Bloomberg. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a slight lift to the markets on this election day with NASDAQ futures leading the gains up about 0.2%, 47 points. We have Dow futures, little changed up 24 points. S&P futures up about 0.1% or 6 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.19%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.32%. That's up 3 basis points. Companies making news, that's Apple. Sources saying it could be considering a move into smart glasses. It's been studying products currently on the market. Its initiative codenamed Atlas. And struggling discount retailer Dollar Tree named a new interim CEO, Michael Creedon Jr. He served as chief operating officer since late 2022. And that news giving a boost to shares. They're up right now more than 4%. And KPMG has cut about 330 people from its U.S. audit business, or about 4% of its staff, in order to counter low turnover rates. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it this morning. Bloomberg Surveillance this election day. We're brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers, their forecast trader. You can trade your views on the 2024 elections. Just answer yes or no. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started this election day. Joining us right now, the last time he was on, he was hugely knowledgeable, Paul. I was blown away. Benedikt Kammel joins us. Why don't you bring him in on... You nailed it. I mean, you told me the strike's not going to get settled last time, and this time was different.
Yeah, it's they finally got the rank and file, Tom, over at Boeing. The machinists up there in the Pacific Northwest agreeing to a contract with Boeing. A piece of good news for them and for the company and for the stock. The stock's up about 1.3% in pre-market trading. Benedikt Kammel joins us, global aviation editorial leader for Bloomberg News. He's based in Berlin, Germany. Benedikt, what's different for this contract versus the last contract? Is it simply dollars and cents?
There's a bit of that. I think the numbers are slightly better. You know, we had now a 38% wage increase. Last time it was 35, so up a smidge. But I think the bigger difference is that there was a general weariness. And you could see it in the faces of the workers, of the union leadership. I think everyone was ready to get this done with. And they probably felt this is as good as it's going to get. Any more holdouts and any more negative votes, we might actually start hurting ourselves more than we start benefiting from this. So there was this sense, this is a pretty good deal. It's a 38% wage increase over a couple of years. There's a big signing bonus. There's a couple of other sweeteners thrown in. And you know, we're moving towards Thanksgiving. People's savings are depleted. People, you know, starting to get cold over there. The joys of standing by the roadside with a sign in your hand are probably rapidly diminishing. So there was that sense of, let's get it done with. This is good. And that's where we got 59% approval. Okay. You know, mathematically all they needed, but not great if you want to repair relations.
So what's the company saying about their ability to kind of restart the assembly line and get those planes coming out of the assembly line, getting them to customers and bringing in cash flow into the company? What's the company saying about timing?
Well, there's no absolute perfect sense of timing here, but they have said it's going to take a while. Kelly Ortberg, the CEO, said a couple of weeks ago, it's much easier to turn things off than it is to turn them back on again. You know, as we all know, fixing something is harder than breaking it. So it will take months, you know, it'll take into next year. To give you a sense, they have said this year will be a cash negative year. They'll have cash outflow. And the next year, the first half, will also be cash negative. And that was, to many people, a surprise. People thought that come early next year, things would be back in repair mode and sort of the company would be on a road to recovery. But clearly, we're looking into the latter part of next year when that'll happen. So this year, they will have burnt about $14 billion of cash. You know, that gives you a sense of just how high the stakes were. And even a company the size of Boeing can't do this forever. So the stakes are really high for both sides to get this deal over the line.
Benedikt, our advantage with you is you're in Berlin, so you get the Toulouse, France Airbus axis. Has Airbus had any advantage from this strike?
Only in so much that people aren't looking at their problems as much as they are at Boeing's. And, you know, Airbus is not without its own faults. Their production is not where it should be. You know, it's not as bad as Boeing's. They are actually producing planes, whereas Boeing right now is close to zero. But they have huge supply chain issues. They have had to cut back their output targets for the year. But people are obviously far more fixated on what's going on at Boeing than they are at Airbus. But it's a complicated market where you can't simply switch from one supplier to the other. So even if you were a Ryanair, which is a Boeing customer, and we had the Ryanair CEO in in the studio yesterday, and he was saying, "Look, I'm not getting the planes I need. I need them for the peak summer period, and they're not coming in." He can't just pick up the phone to Guillaume Faury, the CEO of Airbus, and say, "Hey, can you sell me a couple of planes?" So everyone is kind of locked in, the situation they're in, and everyone is really hoping for this to resolve itself. And this strike, the end of the strike, is one big step towards that.
Benedikt, our youth, back any countless elections, certainly back to 68 and 72 in the Vietnam War, is the defense component of aviation, whether it's Lockheed Martin or McDonnell Douglas, et cetera, et cetera. And the answer, Benedikt, is it's a big distraction. Is Boeing distracted or hindered because of their defense institutional place in America?
Well, I mean, defense is still a big component of Boeing, and it's also part of the reason why, a lot of people have said, is this a company too big to fail? And yes, it is, because they have that big foot in the door on all things defense. And if you compare it to Airbus, it's a much more sizable part of their operation and a more important part. So whatever Boeing looks like in 3, 5, 10 years, the defense component will still be there, and it will be an important part of what they do. It's a different question when you start thinking about space, for instance. Yes, they have this long history of, helping put a man on the moon and all that, but the space business is really where they're bleeding and where they're hurting. So if you look at what they have to do, and Kelly Ortberg, the CEO, has been quite open about this. He says, we can't be everything to everyone. We have to really think hard about what we're good at, where we make our money, and where we might have to make some painful cuts. And if I had to guess, it's probably going to be in the space area more than in the defense market.
Benedikt, what are the Boeing's customers saying? Are they still standing by the company? Again, it's just a duopoly out there. I guess they don't have much of a choice there if you're Southwest Airlines and some other airlines that depend upon Boeing. But what have the customers been saying?
They are, and they're standing with them, and they're saying, we want Boeing to succeed. And oddly, you'd think Airbus is actually saying the same thing. They're saying, we take no joy. I mean, maybe secretly they might take a little bit, but openly they will say, we take no joy in Boeing's misfortunes here, because we are sort of tied at the hip with these guys, and we need them to succeed. We need a healthy market out there. And as I said, if you're a United, if you're an American, if you're a Southwest, you can't just sort of switch back and forth. You have these long-term contracts, you have your crew training, you have your maintenance. All of those things are tied into these decades-long contracts that you have with these suppliers, and therefore they need Boeing to succeed. And as you say, there isn't really much of a choice out there. The Chinese, there are making some noises. There was a Comac 919, but that plane is not certified in the Western Hemisphere, so it'll be years. Who knows whether we on this call will ever see that plane flying in our time zone. But it'll come at some point, but that's far out.
Benedikt, absolutely spectacular. Thank you so much. Benedikt Kammel, worldwide, driving our airline coverage as well. We do Quincy Jones, which you can do for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, a week, forever. Somebody said, what's your favorite Quincy Jones? Which I guess becomes, what's your favorite Michael Jackson? Glenn Ballard was out in L.A. getting things done, and Quincy Jones went to Glenn Ballard. This is like 5 years before Alanis Morissette and Jagged Little Pill. And Glenn Ballard sat down and started a song which, among others, has the best gospel choir ever. Man in the Mirror, to me today, to this day, is the single best thing that Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones did. It's unbelievable, with all the skill of Glenn Ballard. It's election day. Stay with us through the entire day.
Asking him to change his ways, and no
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Lisa Mateo. She'll be dragging an offspring to the voting booth today, doing her public service good. We thank Lisa Mateo for that. Michael Barr with us. Michael Barr with extended news reports this morning, and particularly tomorrow morning. We'll really be emphasizing the granularity of the election tomorrow on Bloomberg Surveillance with the leadership of Michael Barr. We say good morning on YouTube across the nation. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. People go, how can we help? You're doing this new digital exercise. The number one way is to subscribe to YouTube, to Bloomberg Podcast. We are humbled by the growth. They just gave me the October report.
Solid.
Thumb up.
Oh, there you go.
One big thumb up. That's all they go. Okay. I'm too unsophisticated. It's either thumb up, thumb down.
Right.
Exactly. A couple months ago it was thumb down. Like, get to work, Tom. But anyways, out on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast on your commute across this nation. On Election Day, good morning on Spotify, Sirius, 99.1 FM in Washington. Bloomberg 1130 here, the tri-state area. Good morning, 92.9 FM in Boston. Paul, your observation in New Jersey, is it like a lot of tension? It's not a battleground state, right?
No, it's not a battleground state, but there's, obviously the divisions just like everywhere else in the country, and it looks pretty darn even just looking at the signs all around, but we'll have to see how it plays out. But it's not considered a battleground state, but I tell you, watching NFL football Sunday, just the airwaves plastered with the national ads for both Trump and Harris. So that's what the rest of the country, or some of those battleground states, have been dealing with.
They're living
for
it
months.
24/7.
Yeah.
Probably after the election, they'll have the same ads. This election day, we're brought to you by one of our great supporters. Thank you, Cohn Resnick. Cohn Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. Thank you, Cohn Resnick. I've been anticipating this. Well, let's do this. Let's get to the markets. I'm so wound up by the election, I forgot about our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios. Lisa Mateo, my folks,
No problem. Traders this morning, they're taking a little bit of a cautious approach on this election day. Nasdaq futures getting the biggest lift right now. We have Nasdaq futures up about 0.3%, 65 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 41 points. S&P futures up 0.1%, or about 10 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.19%, up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.33%. That's up 4 basis points. Currencies, we have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen weaker at 152.32 against the dollar. We have the euro, British pound stronger, Bitcoin up more than 2.5% at around 68,000. US ETFs investing in Bitcoin. Well, that recorded their highest daily net outflow to date. Checking in with crypto stocks like MicroStrategy, up more than 3%. Shares of Boeing, well, they're up more than 1% right now, and this is after workers voted to accept that new labor contract. And finally, shares of Palantir up 14% after the company boosted full-year profit sales forecasts, kind of pointing to strong U.S. demand for its AI software. And then sticking with AI, sources say OpenAI in regulator talks to become a for-profit company. And finally, AI startup CoreWeave reportedly selected Morgan Stanley, Goldman, and J.P. Morgan to lead its IPO. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. I'm looking at like 6 cable networks, and they all have 6 different countdown clocks.
Right, exactly.
Somebody's counting down to Dixville, and Ed Mills is laughing at me because he knows this is the. I got a countdown clock for, I think, Georgia.
Okay.
That's like early, like 6, 7 p.m.
That's
I got a countdown clock for what matters, like 8 a.m. And then, of course, good morning, the Aleutian Islands, huge YouTube presence.
Oh, yeah? Is that right?
326 people.
Nice. Okay.
At DAC in the Aleutian Islands. They vote last. Ed Mills knows that. He joins us here, policy analyst at Raymond James. I want to focus that, if I can, on the Senate races and, of course, the arch idea of who replaces Mitch McConnell, a Democrat or somebody of a Republican vintage on Wednesday?
Yeah, Tom. So at Raymond James, we think that the Republicans are well positioned to have a majority in the Senate. We're giving that about a 75% odds. The reason why it's not higher than that is that there's some really close elections in Ohio, Montana. That could go the way for Republicans. But Republicans are surprisingly defending seats in Texas. And there's a quirky seat in Nebraska where the Republicans should win, but it wouldn't be a shock if she loses to the independent Dan Osborne later tonight.
I mean, Nebraska, I still don't understand the voting. I mean, I didn't take Ed Mills 101 on this. Let's focus on Ohio. Did Senator Brown want Vice President Harris to campaign with him? Does she boost the Brown effort, or is it just so red that doesn't work out?
So what Sherrod Brown has been saying, and what we put in our research at Raymond James, is that if Donald Trump loses, or if Donald Trump wins Ohio less than 8 percentage votes tonight, that is a fighting chance for Sherrod Brown. The closer the margin is, the better his odds are. If it's 8% or above tonight for Donald Trump, it is likely that Bernie Moreno will win that seat. And so that's where kind of we extrapolate that over to Montana. Sherrod Brown, or in Montana, Donald Trump won that by 16% back in 2020. The larger the margin there, the harder it is for Tester to hold on.
So, Ed, I think a lot of fund managers or a lot of folks in the marketplace are saying, I'm not that concerned with who wins the White House because I think Congress is going to be split, and that kind of means a certain type of policy environment. What's the percentage likelihood, do you think, that there's either a blue wave or a red wave?
Yeah, we think there is about a 30% chance of a Republican sweep. Last week when I was meeting with clients in New York and Boston, people thought that was too low. There was a real sentiment out there that it was closer to 50% of a Republican sweep. Now that's been reset with some of the polling data we've seen over the weekend. We've given a Democratic sweep about a 20% odds, which is higher than other folks out there. But if we're giving a 25% odd to a Democratic Senate, you have to give something close to that for that Democratic sweep. Right. From a market perspective, though, Paul, I think people are clear that a Republican sweep gives you tax reform, but a Democratic sweep gives a little bit more concern. The thing that I think is the sleeper thing out there to be concerned about is a potential Trump victory with a Democratic House. That could be a lot more dysfunction than any other outcome.
Interesting. Ed, your pedigree is to know these politicians and really viscerally to know what they're thinking. Has their behavior changed because of early voting?
A little bit. I mean, it's we're sitting here where we've had record numbers of early vote, and that does bring the campaign kind of to an earlier conclusion for a lot of voters. So what we've seen over the last 25 years that I've been professionally involved in politics is that election cycles begin earlier and earlier. And there's a desire to see what they can do to reach voters earlier and earlier. So that's probably the biggest change, is just how early these elections start at this point.
And Paul wants to get in here, but I got to ask, what was the first political race you were involved in? You're at Boston College. You're down at Foley's on the bar, 3 out of 7 days of the week. And somebody says, hey, Ed Mills, get involved with politics. What was the first race you were involved with?
I was door knocking as a kid, but the first race that I was the campaign manager was my father's state rep race in Massachusetts back in 2000.
Interesting.
He's grizzled.
He's grizzled.
He knows. He's talked first name basis with the fish in the Massachusetts legislature.
Ed, what's the state you're really focusing on here, to not just the White House, but maybe the whole shebang here with Congress?
So early, I think what we're all going to be looking for, Virginia is going to close at 7 o'clock. How quickly is Virginia called? It was called at 7:36 4 years ago. Is it going to go earlier? That's a good sign for Harris. If it's later, that might be a little bit of a good sign for Trump. And then the congressional race that I know that Tom always loves looking at, the 7th congressional district in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger's seat. Yeah. She's not running for re-election. That's a toss-up race. If that goes quickly to the Dems, that's a good sign for them nationally for the House. If it goes to Republicans, that's a let's wait and see what happens in the House moment.
Brilliant. Ed Mills, thank you so much. Hugely valuable. Ed Mills with us, with all his work at Raymond James as well. I mean, these people, I didn't do this. In college, were you knocking on doors or being political?
No, not at all. But some people have that in their blood. They're really into it, and then they think and they believe they can certainly make a difference.
I'm
Good
trying
for
to
them.
get. I'm trying to get the House to get more engaged in civics. I mean, Vet Bill doesn't care. Kennel fees. The dogs are like into it, but the kids aren't. And I'm explaining to the kids, standing in the gym with the TVs up on the stands in 1973, I think it was, and the thundering silence as we realized Watergate was bigger than just some stupid burglary.
Yep.
And you know, there are these I happened to see live the John Dean testimony.
Yep.
Remember, things like that. I mean, trying to get the civics of this, the history of all of this here on Election Day across the nation. Future's up 9. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul Lisa at his final rally of the 2024 campaign in Grand Rapids, Michigan overnight. Former President Trump used a term popularized by former President Nixon to describe his supporters.
We have a silent majority, but we're just sort of speaking up. This has shown that the level of enthusiasm is 5 times greater than their level.
Earlier, Trump campaigned in Pennsylvania, where Vice President Kamala Harris spent her day. After making stops in Allentown, Scranton, and Pittsburgh, Harris ended her campaign last night in Philadelphia.
America is ready for a fresh start, ready for a new way forward where we see our fellow American not as an enemy, but as a neighbor.
The battle for control of the U.S. Congress has topped $10 billion as the two parties vie for power and influence over taxes, spending, the president's agenda, and more. Bloomberg's Amy Morris brings us a preview of the Senate races from Washington.
Republicans are currently favored to gain the Senate majority based on a favorable map. Key races to watch include Montana, where 3-term incumbent John Tester has trailed Republican newcomer Tim Sheehy. Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is defending his seat against car dealer Bernie Moreno. And the wild cards. Democrats need upset wins in Texas, Florida, or Nebraska, where the race is neck and neck. Democrats would also need to keep their seats in the presidential blue wall battlegrounds of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where the races have tightened. Also in Arizona and Nevada. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, Florida, Arizona, and 7 other states are asking voters whether they want to enshrine a right to abortion in their state constitutions. One other note, South Korea's military says North Korea has fired multiple short-range ballistic missiles toward its eastern sea as the country continues its weapons demonstrations. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Yeah, we did some soccer talk yesterday. Tots, Aston Villa. I mean, Kansas City, do they remember the Dolphins years ago? They won like 25 games in a row.
Yeah.
Can the Chiefs do this?
I don't know, man. They're just, I mean, you got Mahomes there. I mean, he wins games so many different ways for them.
I'm going to ask this again. Michael Barr, you're better at this than I am. Are the refs helping the Chiefs?
I don't think so, that game. I just think they just won it flat out in overtime. And it was an exciting game to watch, if you could watch it. I can't, but, I had to catch the highlights.
Well, Mrs. Barr sitting on the edge of the couch, with her hatred for the Chiefs.
Oh, yeah. And hatred's the right word, too.
I understand. How you doing in your rotisserie league? Damien was distraught yesterday.
There are 2 of us crying.
You going down in flames?
Flames, blowtorch, you call it whatever you want. It's bad.
That's an obligatory Election Day football chat.
Yep.
We're doing that as well. Please stay with us. Our election coverage tonight. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lyons. It begins at 5 p.m. Eastern. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Matei. We've got a slight lift to the markets as voting gets underway in a tight race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris for the U.S. presidency. Shares of Trump Media and Technology, they are up about 8%. To the markets we go. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%, 54 points. Dow futures little changed, up 19 points. S&P futures up about 0.1%, or 8 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.19%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.33%, and that's up 4 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.6% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $71 a barrel. We have spot gold higher at $2,737 an ounce. To earnings we go. Yum Brands includes KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. Sales fell more than expected in the third quarter. Meanwhile, Restaurant Brands International, that's the owner of Burger King, Tim Hortons, it posted sales grew slower than expected in the third quarter. Their shares down more than 1%. And shares of DuPont up 2%. It raised its earning guidance for the year after volume gains in the third quarter led to higher sales and profit. And finally, Ferrari's latest earnings, well, just isn't exactly revving up with investors. Shipments in luxury cars fell in the third quarter. Shares are down about 4% in Milan, but still up around 39% this year. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. There are moments in the blur of all this, folks. There's moments where any of our wonderful esteemed guests, they say one single thing, and like it doesn't go away. You remember it 1 hour, 1 day, 1 month later. Gautam Mukunda said something a while back. I think it was, I missed Gautam last time around because I was in Europe, but with Yale School of Management, said something, Paul, that I carried for weeks and weeks and weeks, which is the undecideds shrink. They shrink much more. Mm-hmm. And everybody caught up with Professor Mukunda. He joins us now in studio on this election day. Where are the undecideds now? They got to decide.
They have to decide. At this point, polling, everything here is guesses and stabs in the dark. But all the data I'm seeing suggests that in the last 24 to 48 hours, even the last 1 to 2 weeks, they've broken pretty strongly towards Harris. The really decisive moment, and it's striking so, was the Madison Square Garden event. There's a lot of polling data coming out for Latinos, particularly Latinos in Pennsylvania, that they all heard about it. It mattered to all of them, and it swung some votes. Now, I can't tell you that's enough to swing the election because there aren't many of those people. Like the undecided was, last time I was here, it was 3%. It's probably less than that now, and a lot of people had already voted by the time those events happened. But the Harris campaign is not all that quietly anymore, feeling very confident because of what they've seen in the last few days.
We had yesterday, the piece of news that came out was the Seltzer poll coming out of Iowa that surprisingly showed Vice President Kamala Harris 3 points ahead. What'd you make of that?
Earthquake does not understate the impact that one had. Ann Seltzer's record in Iowa is so good that I occasionally make jokes that she's lived in Iowa her whole life. She only does Iowa. She doesn't poll the state. She just knows every Iowa voter and asks them what they'll do. It's not that she's never been wrong. She missed a gubernatorial race a few years ago. But in general, her record is as close to perfect as a pollster can get. For her to say not just that it's close, but that Trump is 3 points down, stunning. I'll add to that. Okay, let's say she had a statistical fluke. It can happen to anyone, even Seltzer. I don't really think Harris is going to win Iowa. The Trump campaign's response was to leak internals saying that they had numbers saying he was 5 points up. That's really bad for Trump. If he's 5 points up, he should be 10 to 15 points up in Iowa. If he's 5 points up in Iowa, that's really bad news for him across the country. Now, the one thing I'd say is it might be Iowa specific. Iowa's abortion ban went active in July. And basically, Iowa local elections have been nothing but saturation bombing on abortion. And so that might mean that a swing by white women, that's what Seltzer picked up, based on Dobbs, is more intense in Iowa than it is anywhere else in the country.
Turnout. I'm told that it's particularly important this election, given how close the election appears to be. Does one party have an advantage there in terms of turnout?
So everyone agrees that the Harris turnout machine is much better. Like that's not debate. Even the Trump people will tell you that. It's just much more effective. Partly because the Trump people outsourced their entire turnout operation to Charlie Kirk and Elon Musk, and you can't build these things on the fly. Like you actually have to spend years doing it. That being said, Trump had essentially no turnout in operation in 2016, none. And he got people who a Democratic turnout machine would have just written off as not worth approaching. Mm-hmm. He got them to show up and vote for him. There's nothing that helps your turnout more than a clear, consistent message by a charismatic candidate. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, that is a pretty good description of his campaign.
What do you think? I mean, is Pennsylvania the state we should be focusing on, or are there some other places we should be looking?
I would start with Pennsylvania. So it says it's harder to get early info from states than it is from particular areas. So it varies from election to election. But I'll tell you, in 2016, I was looking at some areas in Virginia. And I was in China, of all things. I was doing election commentary in Beijing, among the strangest experiences of my life. And so about 9 p.m. local time, which would have been 9 a.m. local time, which would have been 9 p.m. time here, I got those results and turned to some people next to me and said, I think Clinton's going to lose. Mm-hmm. This time, there's actually Pennsylvania, yes, also Delaware. They're oddly, I mean, obviously they're going to win Delaware, but if it's closer than you expect, that would be a pretty bad sign for Harris.
Picking presidents. Mr. Trump is unique. Let's all, even his supporters will agree, it's a unique process. What have we learned, your wonderful book, Picking Presidents, what have we learned about picking presidents that prepares us for 2028?
I think counterintuitively, the thing maybe we should learn is the campaigns are just too long. I think Harris got a real benefit from maybe this was too short for her. But the 2-year-long election cycle that we've been doing for presidential campaigns, it drives everyone insane. It forces people to take positions that end up being completely indefensible.
So to be clear here, for Vice President Harris, she had an advantage because of the delay.
I won't say, I think she would rather have had a normal cycle, and I have to give her credit for being able to perform this balancing act in this short span of time. But if I were a normal candidate, I would rather do 6 months than 2 years.
Charlie Cook led his before-election essay with, we grew up with landslides.
Yeah.
I was explaining at home what they did to McGovern in 72. That's beyond the realm of how we think now. Do you desire, Professor, that we get back to landslides, back to where we vote for somebody with an image, or are we just wedded to this polarity forever?
So I don't think we are. We saw a landslide in 2008, and 2012 was not that close. This polarity is deeply aberrational. And I'll say, speaking as a political scientist for a second, we don't really understand why. We don't have good theories as to what is going on, as to why the elections are so perfectly balanced right now. I think the American political system basically does not work when it is in deadlock. Other political systems do.
But to the laureates at MIT, is it, in the Power and Progress, is it just a separation of the nation here between the haves and the have-nots? Is that really all this comes down to?
I don't think so. I think that is a driving issue, but although the Trump campaign sort of set image of itself that it portrays as of the working class tribunal, Trump voters are significantly wealthier than Harris voters. They were significantly wealthier than Biden voters in 2020. They will be significantly wealthier than Harris was in 2024. And so you have a real conflict between the image of the campaigns and their voter base, and that is going to be resolved eventually, but it might take a while.
Can't wait to talk to you after this election. Gautam Mukunda with us, of course, of Yale, his book, Picking Presidents, How to Make the Most Consequential Decision in the World. The first sentence says it all. And across this nation, we say, every 4 years, the American people choose the most powerful person on the earth. They do it using a system created by the Founding Fathers in the 1780s based on the theories of Enlightenment philosophers and their knowledge of the Roman Republic. That shows the grandeur of the moment. It's just extraordinary here. They had the same polarity. When I was in Rome, you could see the polarity. They had a countdown clock in Rome.
Do they? Okay, right in the cafe.
They had a countdown clock in the cafe. We'll have our continuing coverage here tonight at 5 p.m. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines begin our election coverage. From New York City on YouTube, subscribe. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures kind of in this wait-and-see approach. The U.S. presidential race gets underway. Polls show Donald Trump and Kamala Harris deadlock both nationally and across swing states. Now, after Election Day, we move on to something else. It's Thursday's Federal Reserve decision on interest rates and Jerome Powell's press conference. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 67 points. We have Dow futures up 0.1%, 43 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or 11 points. The two-year yield, 4.19%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.33%, and that's up 4 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.7% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $72 a barrel. We have spot gold at $2,742 an ounce. Shares of telehealth company Hims & Hers up 7%, posted a quarterly profit, raised its annual sales forecast. It's the weight loss drugs. They drew in more subscribers. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Your economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth. Thank you, Commonwealth, for your support. Supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor-to-staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support in technology. Scheduled in 6 minutes, Mark Cuban in conversation with Bloomberg with Jonathan Farrell. We're going to take that. It should be interesting to see what he says about the Dallas Mavericks. And, an election as well. Before that, we get smarter with Hugh Von Steenis. We're going to rip up the script here. He's Vice Chair Oliver Wyman. We should be talking to him about the update, Commerce Bank, UniCredit. Forget about it. We're going all British all the time. 14 people have come in this studio, Hugh, and they've said, this is great. It's a shorter election because of Biden and Harris. We're more British. Do you sense that this election is advantaged in clarity because it's a shorter, briefer election, like what you inflict upon the United Kingdom?
Gosh, that's a painful one. I mean, I think even our elections feel quite long, and your run-ins are incredibly long. Look. I mean, what's been common between the UK and the US election is the edges are much more profound, and so you're accentuating the differences rather than fighting for the middle ground. And I think that's been clear on both sides of the pond. I'm
trying to understand Labour Tory. I read it daily, folks, and go, I can't keep. It's like Todd's soccer; it changes game to game, but. The basic idea here is a polarization of developed society. Yep. With your expertise in continental Europe, Germany gets the headlines, but it's really every nation is as polarized as America.
Yeah, I mean, look, France is proving to be somewhat ungovernable at the moment and is really in a funk. Holland's had problems with its government. Germany's now going through it. I mean, look, the economic model as well as the politics is quite fractured.
Talk to us from the worlds of private equity, private credit. How is your world, how is it viewing this election? And does one party benefit your world, the private credit, private equity business versus another?
I think it's really complex. It comes down to what are the exact policies, and this isn't just about the president. It's then about the shape of your Congress and Senate. Look, I mean, the mega trend of inflows to private credit remains really strong. I mean, we saw Brookfield at an all-time high yesterday. 2/3 of their flows coming from fixed income. Blackstone, near an all-time high, and Apollo reports today, again, near an all-time high. We're actually on the other side of the pond. Let me give you a UK stock. Schroders at a 10-year low. So that polarization between the traditional asset managers and the private credit is very strong. But, investing is about detail. So I don't want to give you some bland answer that it doesn't matter. It really matters, but in the specifics of what does it mean for planning? What does it mean for interest rates, term premium? I think it's tough to give you a single answer. Sorry, Paul.
Hugh Von Steenis, you've done so much work with banking and with your service to the United Kingdom with Governor Carney. I guess my basic idea is with Mark Cuban coming up in 3 or 4 minutes, billionaires in politics, you buff off them. Mm-hmm. How are billionaires in politics doing when we speak, as an example, with Mark Cuban?
It's interesting. Look, so interesting. Some of the big themes with family offices are sort of one, gold. I was at a really interesting event last week where some of the billionaires were saying maybe I should put up to 10 to 20% of my money in gold as a hedge. Two, it's all about innovation. So it's obviously everyone's bragging about their latest AI investment, and if they got more, that's a big family office theme. But third is, where do you put your next dime? And should you go in the US or here in Europe?
Hugh Von Steenis, thank you so much. Too short from Oliver Wyman. And now a conversation, our Jonathan Farrell with Mark Cuban.
I'm a swing state voter. I'm in Pennsylvania state, and I still haven't decided who I'm going to vote for. And I'm thinking back to how Harris talked about in 2019 that she wanted to ban fracking. I understand she's changed her mind, but I'm worried that she's a bit of a shapeshifter. She gets back into power, and she'll change her mind again. How do you settle those concerns?
The world has changed since 2019. She's open-minded. She's talked openly about the fact that she wants to give dissenting opinions a place at the table with her. She's not dogmatic. That's how you explain it. And she's looking to put together the best policy. She said in 2020 that she supported fracking. So I think that's a non-issue. And in terms of, is she just an extension of Biden? Just look at Biden's budget proposal versus what Kamala Harris has actually proposed. Biden wanted much higher taxes. Kamala Harris came in at 28% for tax rate for cap gains and 28% for corporation, and did not say a word and will not say a word about unrealized capital gains. And so I think she's completely different. She's not a shapeshifter in the least bit.
Well, that individual we were speaking to, Scott Bessent, this key economic policy advisor to the Trump campaign, says that Harris, what he hears from a lot of Wall Street journals, that she would be moderated by a Republican Senate. And that's why Wall Street would be willing to vote for her, because of that moderating effect that she would get from a red Senate. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, balance is not a bad thing necessarily. I'm not opposed to a divided Congress. But the bottom line is, what will Kamala Harris do? And I think she's better for the economy in so many ways. There's 335 million people in this country. 4 million make $400,000 or more. The other 330 million make less. And she's been very specific that if you make $400,000 or less, your taxes aren't going up. In fact, for 100 million people, they're going down. The other big expense that every household is fearful of is healthcare expenses. Donald Trump has said he has a concept of a plan. Kamala Harris has been very specific on the pharmaceutical side, saying she's going after the pharmacy benefit managers, the middlemen, and she'll introduce transparency. I know from my own personal experiences with cost-plus drugs, that'll lead to a 20, 30% or more deduction in the cost of medications for households and businesses. And then you've got tariffs. As Michael, I think it was, said earlier, tariffs are a bad idea. I mean,
well, if they're so bad, then why did Biden and Kamala Harris keep them? They keep the Trump
well, let's
era
talk about that, right? Because
that's
not completely accurate. First, look at the EU. Biden signed a deal saying that there would be no tariffs between the two, EU and the United States, for the next 5 years. So those tariffs are gone. And then you look at what Trump tried to introduce. He had 4 years to try to implement tariffs that worked, and he got his butt kicked by China. The retaliatory tariffs almost destroyed the soybean and the farming industry, and he had to pay out $20 million. But as it applies to households, right, he's talking about a 60% across the board tariffs for Chinese imports. China makes just about every Christmas present that we buy for our kids. So families would be looking at a 60% or more increase in what they'd spend on Christmas. And the downstream impact of that would be significant to small and large businesses.
Mark, let's talk about something you've been very vocal on. This is regulation. You've said that you don't think Harris should keep Lina Khan, the head of the FTC, on. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York, went to Twitter and she said billionaires like you, Mark, are trying to play footsie with the ticket. If anyone goes near Lina Khan, there will be, quote, an out-and-out brawl. Where is Harris when it comes to things like the FTC?
I don't know. I haven't talked about personnel with her or her team. I have no intention about talking about personnel. I was asked a question about what I thought about the FTC, and I thought that, the possibility of breaking up the big technology companies would be a negative, because I think, winning the AI battle for the United States is paramount from a military and an economic perspective. So I voiced my opinion, but I'm not involved in those conversations at all.
But it really raises this ultimate question, which is what policies will she follow? She's been engaging with AOC quite a bit in terms of the campaign trail. And there's a real question of how much there will be an effort to cater to the further left sides of the Democratic wing versus the sort of centrist appeal that she's been trying to have. How much are you actually getting confidence that she's going to have business executives in cabinet positions, in top areas where she really is listening to what they have to say?
I talk to her campaign almost every day. I'm 100% certain. I'm not just confident. I'm certain that that's what they're going to do. I've been on the trail with Doug Emhoff, who, as part of his presentation, talks about what a capitalist she is. She's talked about, wanting to create 25 million new businesses. That's not a reflection of anything far left. She, one of the first things she did was introduce a tax deduction or increase the tax deduction for startup costs to $50,000. That's very important. She recognizes that of the 33 million companies in this country, 99% are passed through, 99% are run by people making $400K or less. Those small businesses are what drive the economy. They create most of the new jobs every single year. So she's focused on an opportunity economy. I don't think she can be any more clear.
Mark, do you think that this campaign for Kamala Harris could have done more to reach out to the male voter? This seems to be an election that is unique in just how bifurcated the male and the female vote really has been. There were some questions around Joe Rogan and how to appeal to the male vote and how to really bring the genders together. What's your take on this campaign's approach to that?
I think it was very data-driven. I mean, women have a high propensity of voting, and with reproductive rights and other issues that were geared towards women, I think she did a great job of connecting to them. Maybe she didn't do everything she could have with men, but that's okay because she went to the people who are going to vote more. You go, as a business person, you go to the people you have the best opportunity to sell to. Who's going to buy your product? Who's going to vote for you in this particular case? And the fact that she's only been in the race 14 weeks and she's caught up completely and now I believe passed her and will win today, I think she's done the exact right thing.
Mark, speaking of business and product, there's a famous quote from Michael Jordan, which I'm sure you know well. Republicans buy sneakers too. It raises a question about you. I wanted to ask you about this. For a man who's got a line of businesses, why was this important to you to put your name and reputation on the line and really get deep into politics when ultimately Republicans buy sneakers too?
So I'm not going to get deep into politics, but I think this is a close election for a reason. And I think Kamala Harris will be the best president and is a better choice than Donald Trump. It's that simple. I mean, I love this country. I'm in this position because of everything this country has given me. I'm blessed. And I thought, I truly believe that she will be the better president for the United States of America. And that's the only reason I'm doing this.
Well, thank you for sharing your time with us this morning. We appreciate it, Mark. And hopefully we can catch up again soon. Mark Cuban there on the latest campaign effort from the Harris campaign.
Jonathan Farrow with Mark Cuban, a spirited conversation here on Election Day, to say the least. Spirited conversation. And, he's like everybody else. The clock's ticking, and we have to wait for results, beginning with Georgia here at 7 p.m. tonight.
Absolutely. And he's been, I think, a pretty out there supporter of Vice President Harris, so we got a few minutes of his time. Just looking at the markets here, Tom, a little bit of green on the screen here, not much. The S&P is up 13 points. That's about 0.2%, and the NASDAQ up about 75 points, about 0.3%. And Tom, the 10-year Treasury yield's a little bit higher here today, lifting 4.32% on your 10-year.
Again, futures up 14. Bloomberg surveillance were brought to you on Election Day by Interactive Brokers. Their portfolio analyst consolidate, analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard. Do it for free. Sign up for Portfolio Analyst at ibkr.com/free PA. Life goes on. And a gentleman who did so much for America, changed what we do, Bernard Marcus, has died. He, of course, founded Home Depot. This news just coming across the Bloomberg. I'm sure Michael Barr will have much more on this in the coming hours. The founder of the Big Orange, Home Depot, co-founder Bernard Marcus, has died. On this Election Day, we look to election coverage tonight. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lines, 5 p.m. Jonathan Farrow will join at 7 p.m. with Anne-Marie Horton for coverage through the evening across all of our Bloomberg platforms, including on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. From New York City, futures up 13. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a slight lift to the markets on this election day with NASDAQ futures leading the gains. Shares of Trump Media and Technology up more than 9%. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 66 points. Dow futures little changed, up 37 points. We have S&P futures up 0.2% or 11 points. The two-year yield at 4.19%. That's up 2 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.33%, and that's up 4 basis points. Some more economic data out this morning. September trade deficit, well, it widened to $84.4 billion. That's up from $70.8 billion in the prior month. Up next this morning, the ISM Services Index. Few companies making news. Apple said to propose investing almost $10 million in Indonesia. That's in a bid to have that ban on iPhone 16 sales there lifted. And shares of discount retailer Dollar Tree, well, they're up more than 4%. The company appointed COO Michael Creedon as interim chief. And TGI Fridays franchisees, they have a new concern, the chain's recent bankruptcy that could bring in a wave of customers that are cashing in on that $50 million in unused gift cards. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. I want to frame this out because she comes on and, one side goes hysterical, the other side goes less hysterical. We're all hysterical for Wendy Schiller. She's at Brown University. She's absolutely definitive. A number of years ago, she did a side project, I believe for Princeton University Press, I'm not even sure, on electing the Senate, indirect democracy before we grew up. And Wendy, the Great Divide is 1913, before World War I, the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Professor Schiller, you are expert in our democracy. What is the character of our democracy this first Tuesday of November 2024?
The character of our democracy, Tom, is far more diverse than it was in 1913. As you know, women hadn't even gotten the vote yet, but 1913 is also a big year for the income tax, right? So we had a lot of constitutional activity around a time where the society was changing rapidly. And there were progressives who thought the government should be more responsive, the government should provide more, and making senators directly elected as opposed to being elected by state legislators in often messy and conflicted and not resolved elections that went on for days and days and days. And months to resolve. They thought, more power literally in the hands of the people would yield a more productive and responsive democracy. So we have to ask ourselves if that's the case today. Certainly the federal government was much smaller, but we are a more diverse, more vibrant, and I would say more free democracy than we've ever been before. You're
going to have a freshman at Brown. And Wendy, they're going to write their paper with ChatGPT and all that AI stuff as well. But the 2-minute drill is a redux of the gender gap. What is the character of our gender gap this election day?
Well, polling indicates that it's larger than it's been in the past. It ranges somewhere between 7 and 9 points that more women vote for the Democratic Party. That number is driven in large part by Black women who turn out about 72% of registered Black women vote. And they really push that gender gap for the Democrats. White women, particularly white women, Protestant, married, lean Republican. So it's a very interesting dynamic within that gender gap. You really have to piece it out. So if it comes to pass that it's an 11% or a 10% gender gap, that's a hard mountain for Donald Trump to climb. And what we're seeing is women over the age of 65, at least so far, and some of the polling have indicated that they either have already voted for Kamala Harris or they support Kamala Harris in bigger numbers vis-a-vis men. I'm also talking about that Iowa poll than in recent elections. And that also poses a difficulty for the Republicans because they usually win about 6-7 points margin on people over the age of 65. So it's not just young women directly affected by availability of reproductive rights. It's older women having lived through a time when there was no Roe decision. Abortion was completely illegal. So I don't know what that dynamic will look like in the end, but it could be driving that gender gap larger than we've seen in previous elections.
Wendy, when we all wake up tomorrow morning, what will we know and what will we not know, do you think?
Oh, listen to you.
Yeah.
It's like a pundit, Wendy Schiller.
I mean, it feels instinctively that if Donald Trump, holds on and performs as well as he did in 2016, we're going to know that earlier in places like Michigan, for example, even in Pennsylvania on early returns. We're going to see. So I think if we see those trends, I think we're looking at an easier victory for him across swing states. If we see turnout in places like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit, all of which had lower black voting turnout in 2016 than they did in 2020, that really cost Hillary Clinton. If you're not seeing those numbers at a steady pace today, I think that's a very bad sign for the Democrats. So we do have some signals and some things we can think about, even despite very high early voting, what's going on today on the ground. And I think we'll know a little bit about that trend before all the polls close.
Down ballot, what are some of the key races that you're focusing on, Wendy?
Well, I'm certainly looking at places like Michigan with Alyssa Slotkin running, Tammy Baldwin, Bob Casey, all of those. Bob Casey and Tammy Baldwin are incumbents. They're expected to win narrowly. We're looking at Arizona, very interesting race. You could have people voting for Ruben Gallego, the Democrat, but also voting for Donald Trump, which would cost Kamala Harris that state. Jackie Rosen's incumbent in Nevada. She had a big lead. It's a little bit less big now. We'll see if she holds on. So if these Democrats hold on, particularly Sherrod Brown in Ohio, that really changes the extent to which Republicans can take the Senate with a large lead. You're looking at West Virginia going Republican, and Montana looks like Tester will lose, but it's looked like that before, and he's managed to win. And so in North Carolina, really interesting state, right? We have the collapse of the Republican candidate for governor, and then we have record early voting. What does that tell us about how the Democrats could do in North Carolina? Again, those polls closed pretty early, and I think we're going to have signals in Georgia and North Carolina relatively early in the evening.
Wendy, I mean, Mr. Trump is his own phenomenon. I think we can all agree with that. Through this election, how is liberal, how is progressive, how is the left adapted or changed to get to 2028?
Well, Kamala Harris has tried to really sort of calm the left down, meaning, that suburban voters, sweet spot, more conservative Latino voters, let's say, more conservative Black men, for example, just calming them down. And the images that we saw, 6-8 months ago, protests, all sorts of things that make, the average voter nervous about the Democratic Party, that seemed to go away when Kamala Harris got the nomination for the most part. So I think that's the conundrum, is if she wins, which flank of the Democratic Party will actually be most influential with Kamala Harris? And we think if she wins, she'd run again in 28. So if this recipe that she's cooked up for this election defeats Donald Trump, it's going to be a very compelling message within the party to stick with this message and not go too far to the left.
Wendy, thank you so much, and thank you forward as well, Professor Schiller, to join us after the election. I am most certain. Wendy Schiller at Brown University, and of course with all of her writings on American civics, most of which we've forgotten over the years as well. It's election day, Paul. I mean, have you voted? I did the write-in thing.
I did the write-in thing.
It was very smooth.
Yeah, it was very smooth, although it seems kind of low tech, literally checking boxes on a piece of paper and then putting them in the mail. It seems like. And
you're like, did it get there? I wish I got a receipt back. We got your letter.
Exactly. You're in receipt of your letter. But
do you think I got it? Yeah.
It feels like there's a technology out there that could make this all so much more, I guess, frictionless, if you will, and secure.
As we look at Quincy Jones, the body of his work, 1964, we had Leslie Gore on yesterday. With Frank Sinatra, they redid it for Sinatra's last effort in 1984, and they picked the right song. Frank Sinatra with Quincy Jones getting it done on his 57th album.
That shark bites with his teeth, dear. Scarlet billow, they begin to spread. Fancy white gloves, though, as McHeath, dear. So there's barely never one trace of red on the sidewalk one Sunday morning. By a body oozing life. Someone sneaking round the corner. Could that someone perhaps perchance be Mac the Knife?
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning. Good election day. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, the entire team here. A lot of questions about what we're doing. We will be here tomorrow morning. Right now it's 7 a.m. Nathan Hager and Karen Mosca doing that great early morning job. Look for us tomorrow to give you where we stand, particularly, I would suggest, Paul, in the Senate tomorrow morning.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll be looking down ballot as well as the White House. And, you know, the experts, Tom, are telling us we've got to be patient here as we think about counting all these votes for all these elections. So we'll be here tomorrow morning.
And, of course, a market reaction in equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, dollar fractionally weaker. It's a churn to the market after the jobs day on Friday. You know what? If there was an election, it'd maybe sort of be the same here is what we see. But the answer is it's a churn awaiting those important results. Good morning across YouTube internationally. We say good morning. Where do we vote last? Dixville, Notch, New Hampshire, Gura on top of that.
Yep.
You know, he's at Freeport, you know, Maine, LLB and all that.
Sure.
Yeah, 3-3 in Dixville, Notch, in New Hampshire. They got the countdown clocks up here on all the TV. My countdown clock is 16 hours from now.
Is it?
That's out west of Hawaii.
Wow.
East of Midway, and you go way, way north, the Aleutian Islands of Alaska.
All right, Google
326 people is the count I saw.
Okay.
And on Edek Island, they will vote at about 1 a.m. our time. They close the polls, I should say.
Okay.
At 1 a.m. our time. Somehow I think we'll have some decisions before that.
Wow, that is out there. You're right.
On that this morning. Futures up 6, Dow futures up 17. Let's get right to it from the Interactive Broker Studio. We need a market check, Lisa Mateo.
We do. Futures just treading water on this election day. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up just 0.1%, 31 points. Dow futures little change, up 20 points. We have S&P futures up 0.1% or 6 points. The 2-year yield at 4.18%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.32%. That's up 3 basis points. To currencies, a dollar weaker. Japanese yen little changed. Euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up more than 2.5% at around 68,000. Want to check in with some crypto-related stocks like MicroStrategy up more than 3%. Strong U.S. robust demand for AI software. That has shares of Palantir up more than 16% quarterly. Revenue beat estimates, raised its forecast for operating income in the current period. A Dan Ives favorite. Shares of Boeing up nearly 2%. Workers voted to accept that new labor contract, end their strike after 53 days. And today, Wells Fargo expected to begin the first ever contract negotiations between a giant U.S. bank and unionized employees. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks for that update, particularly on Palantir. Dan Ives within the hour, raising our price target on Palantir to 57, reflecting our increased confidence in the game-changing AIP strategy. I have no idea what that is.
But I'm with him.
With use cases for AI taking hold over the year. This was an eye-popping quarter/goal for the Messi, this is like soccer talk.
I think so.
He does this for Pharaoh. The Messi of AI growth story is AIP receives unprecedented demand. Then he's got a bunch of emojis here. He's so hip, he even knows how to use emojis. Do you use emojis?
No, please.
We don't use
I'm a
emojis.
professional.
Lisa,
Stop.
do you use emojis?
I do.
Oh, God. Maybe you should interview Ives next time.
The stock is up 140% year to date, Tom. It's got a market cap of $94 billion. Wow.
Buffet's selling Apple. I'm completely out of the market and triple leveraged all cash, and maybe, at some point I should get on that. On the bond market, and I am in the camp, the bond market is a litmus paper of this election day. Gennady Goldberg briefs us. Full faith and credit, U.S. rate strategy at TD Securities. Gennady, is the bond market going to move tomorrow?
Oh, you betcha. And it really almost doesn't matter who wins. I think the market at this point really needs some certainty. So I think if it's Donald Trump, you'll probably get a bear steepening in rates. I think if it's Kamala Harris, assuming we know that it's one of these two, I think you get a bit of a rally in rates, probably closer to the 4% mark over the next couple of days.
But we also have your Federal Reserve on Thursday. Given the political backdrop, what do you expect to see out of Jay Powell?
It's interesting. I think they're going to try their darnest to say very little. Guidance is going to be very light. I think they're going to try to keep very open mind for upcoming meetings. The only thing we're really watching for, aside from the 25 basis point cut, which I think is a given at this point, is whether Powell drops any hint about their likelihood of potentially skipping a meeting for a rate cut at some point. Now, the data recently has been kind of mixed. Excluding the payroll data we got last Friday, it's been a little bit better. So they could drop a hint that if the data stays strong, aside from that kind of weather-impacted payroll report, they could be open to potentially skipping a meeting. I think that would be perceived as pretty hawkish by markets.
Not that I'm focused on the Fed. Yeah, folks, we'll do the Fed decides here post-election if we get to some beauty rest. but the idea, Paul, here of this December pause is percolating.
It is. And it's been over the last week or 10 days, it feels like. So, Gennady, are you surprised that yields have moved higher despite the fact that the Fed has, in fact, cut 50 basis points and has indicated that it's willing to do more? Are you surprised that yields have, in fact, pushed higher?
Well, I think right now what we're getting is a lot of noise from the election. If you look at the betting market odds, they've certainly moved in the direction of a red wave up until really a couple of days ago, up until that last poll was released that kind of bucked the trend with the rest of them. You were getting a pretty one-to-one correlation between rates and red wave odds effectively. We'll see how that gets resolved over the next day or two. Hopefully it's a day or two, not a week or two. And then the market, I think, will be free to start to trade fundamentals. And at that point, you should be seeing rates drift gradually lower. It's just we really need to get this week under our belt and then regroup and see where things go next.
Gennady, I'm looking at the Bloomberg Launchpad, and folks, it's got that lassitude we saw yesterday. And, as Mr. Goldberg says, some point it's going to move. The 2-year real yield, wow, rounded up 2.03%. If you get a lower rate regime, where do you suggest the 2-year inflation-adjusted yield goes to?
I think probably the low ones. Now, I know that's over the course of the next year. Keep that in mind. But I think we gradually drift lower in rate. Even if the Fed is telling us that they're going to be cutting gradually, not at every meeting, that still means lower front-end rates. And over time, that's going to mean probably towards kind of the low 1% area. I would say that's kind of the target over the next year.
So, Gennady, when you talk to clients, are they just hedged to the to their teeth these days? I mean, just given the uncertainty over the next 24, 48, 72 hours?
Honestly, I think most clients have battened down the hatches at this point. I think everyone is just waiting to get through this period of, as you said, 24, 48, 72 hours or more. There's fewer concerns about the Fed in November, at least this week. There's lots of uncertainty about the Fed going forward. Really what I'm hearing from clients is that they'd rather react to the election results than try to position for them and actually take that risk, because there's just too much uncertainty in both sides. So I think there's a lot of folks waiting to regroup. There's a lot of cash just sitting on the sidelines waiting. And either way, I think people will be happy to get some of that uncertainty out of the way.
Absolutely. So again, this Fed, if it cuts 25 here, I mean, is that skip in December? Is that something you think is something we should be preparing for and just wait till 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be December necessarily. It could certainly be January. It could be March of next year. I think they can start laying the groundwork for an eventual skip, whether it's in December, January, March. If they tell us that the data has actually been doing better than they expected, the inflation data has been doing a little bit less well than they had hoped for. So that combination could certainly get them a little bit more cautious. And, all Powell has to do is really drop a hint that the cuts don't have to be consecutive. Just look at the last summary of economic projections. Most FOMC members didn't expect consecutive rate cuts in the coming years.
Yeah. Thanks for the brief. Gennady Goldberg, TD Securities, with us today here on yield. The Sweeney yield 4.18% on the 2-year yield. I got to be honest, that's what I'm going to watch more than anything.
Yep.
The real yields really come out here. 2.03% is jaw-dropping. Out through 1.8, 1.9, out to a higher inflation-adjusted yield. What's the housing market doing? I mean, is a mortgage
rates are back higher? No, but they're definitely moving higher. So if the folks that were looking for to get a sub 6% mortgage, it's not there yet, Tom.
It's not there. Futures up 8. Dow futures up 29. The VIX under 22, 21.89. With our news in New York City this election day, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Americans are voting this election day whether to send Donald Trump back to the White House or elevate Kamala Harris to the Oval Office. At his final rally of the 2024 campaign in Michigan overnight, former President Trump spoke in Grand Rapids.
If we win Michigan, we win the whole thing,
Vice President Harris finished her campaign for president last night at a rally in Philadelphia.
It is time for a new generation of leadership in America.
Bloomberg's David Gura is in Philadelphia.
There was a large crowd on Benjamin Franklin Parkway, about 30,000 people, according to the campaign. And there were big entertainment acts. Ricky Martin was there, Lady Gaga. Fat Joe came and spoke as well. And when she came out, she gave a version of the stump speech that she's given, which is largely optimistic and stands in sort of stark contrast to what we heard from former President Trump as he campaigned in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Michigan yesterday. And she said explicitly, we are optimistic. You listen to what former President Trump said yesterday. He talked about decline and decay, a much darker image of the way things are and where they might be headed.
Bloomberg's David Gura. There are also some high-profile ballot measures up for a vote across the country. 10 states have pro-abortion rights items on the ballot, including Arizona, Florida, Nevada, Maryland, and New York. Nebraska has an anti-abortion measure up for a vote. 4 states will consider legalizing marijuana. That measure is on the ballot in Florida, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Increases to the minimum wage are on the ballot in California, Massachusetts, Alaska, and Arizona. And finally, Bernard Marcus, the former pharmacist, became a billionaire by co-founding Home Depot, the world's largest home improvement retailer, has died. The company announced Marcus's death on its website, calling him a master merchant and a genius with customer service. Bernard Marcus was 95. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
I'm thrilled you mentioned the ballot propositions, which is, to me, a West Coast thing. I once sat in a kitchen outside of L.A. with my father and watched him struggle at the kitchen table with what to do with like 15 or 20 ballot propositions.
That's how they do it in Cali.
You know, one of them was, should the LA Dodgers trade for Mookie Betts? But These are a big deal, Michael.
Well,
They're not a small item.
No, these are big, and like I said, it was like you got the marijuana, proposals out there. You have other proposals as well. I think in Arizona they have one where it can local law enforcement throw out so-called people who illegally cross the border.
Those are the emotional ones. But Proposition 2 in California, I think I have this right, folks. I stand corrected if I'm wrong. This bond issue would authorize the state to borrow $8.5 billion for K through 12 schools and $1.5 billion for community college constructions and modernization. You got to go in a booth or a write-in ballot, and be knowledgeable about that. And in California, it's on steroids.
What I can't stand are the ballot measures. Yes means no, and no means yes. I can't just make it
really,
clear.
I totally agree.
So.
I mean, that's a struggle to say the least. We'll have coverage of that. We're in heated meetings. Like Lisa, Paul, and I are going to completely step aside tomorrow morning. It will be the Michael Barr show as we have election results, and Michael Barr will lead our coverage on that tomorrow morning. On YouTube, stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we've got a slight lift to the markets, and this is as voting gets underway. Traders anticipate a long night of ballot counting, the potential for sharp swings no matter the outcome. We have shares of Trump Media and Technology up more than 9%. To the markets we go. NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. 56 points. Dow futures little change, up 38 points. S&P futures up 0.1% or 9 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.18%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.32%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.7% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $72 a barrel. We have spot gold higher at $2,744 an ounce. To earnings we go. We'll start with Yum Brands, KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. Sales fell more than expected in the third quarter. Meanwhile, restaurant brands, that's Burger King and Tim Hortons, posted sales grew slower than expected in the third quarter. Its shares are down more than 2%. Apollo Global Management up 4%. Assets reached $733 billion. That was thanks to a push from wealthy clients. And then after the bell, onto server maker Super Microcomputer. And that should be interesting. Investors wondering if the company will be delisted by the NASDAQ, even booted from the S&P 500. We shall see. Its shares up more than 2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Lisa, on this election day, thank you for keeping our eyes on stocks. I mean, it's refreshing to say the least.
A lot of earnings.
A lot of earnings. It's still there. And, the backdrop here is 2.8% GDP and a guesstimate forward that I think we can safely say there's a large consensus feel we're not heading for a recession.
Right.
I think that's sort of out there.
I think you're right.
As well. We had a really interesting conversation today with Jordan Rochester over at Mizuho. And for the election, in dollar dynamics, he bracketed euro. Joining us now, up to speed on euro, Dan Tobon joins us from Citigroup, and of course his London watch for them. And he's, of course, with FX there, a G10 FX strategy at Citigroup. So if you bracket euro, Trump, Harris, Euro right now is, I'm looking, Dan, my eyes are failing me, a 109. With Trump, where's Euro? With Harris, where's Euro?
Yeah, well, I mean, very simply, if Trump wins, euro dollar goes down, potentially all the way towards around 105. That'd probably be a bit of a stretch, but it could get down that far. If Harris wins, euro higher, at least back to 110, but there might be some difficulty getting higher than that simply because data in the U.S. has been outperforming the euro.
So with Harris, the euro strengthens. It's asymmetric. Is it about euro stronger, or is it sell the dollar with Harris?
No, this is absolutely about the dollar, and actually there's dollar yen would be a trade we'd be looking at more because
bracket that, please.
It's a proxy.
152.
It's a proxy for rates, and so rates should go down, yields should go down if we see a Harris win, and so dollar yen should go down as well.
Since the beginning of time, when I think about trading currencies, I think about Citibank and Citi. Now, you guys are New York, London, Asia. You trade everything. How are you guys staffing up for the next 12 to 24 hours globally, currency desk at Citi?
Oh, it's going to be busy, and it's going to be all hands on deck, at least tonight, until we have, probably until midnight. We have to see how the results are coming out. But certainly 24/7, we will have staff, and we will be there for
what currency pair, what indicator of FX is what Dan Tobon's going to watch off the Bloomberg at Citi?
I'm going to be watching dollar yen and dollar mex. Those will be the two key ones to keep an eye on.
Talk to us about dollar Mexican peso. What's the relationship there? What's driving that trade these days?
Dollar mex has a lot of domestic stories, but it's also sensitive to the U.S. dynamic if Trump wins, both because the USMCA will come under review, and so there's some potential uncertainty around there, and also because there's been a lot of border disputes, so mex just comes into focus and remains one of the key
So
currencies.
mex is 20.13. If Trump is going to win or appear to win, it weakens to 21.22.
In that area, it's hard to say overnight, but certainly potential.
Yeah, I don't need, it's completely unfair, but the direction.
Absolutely, that's the right
Like, when you talk to your clients, do you feel like they're hedged today? Are they making bets today? Are they just saying, I'm on the sidelines today? Because there will be movements in your market.
Yeah, absolutely. For the most part, the big accounts have really reduced positioning and are trying to go in as lightly positioned as possible. The more active clients, they're long dollar. They've reduced some of that. They were a lot more long dollar last week when Trump odds were a bit higher. Still leaning towards long dollar, though.
So, all right, let's go 72 hours, 3, 4, 5 days from now. What do you think?
Long term.
Long term. Let's get back to more fundamentals. What's your view here of the currency markets? Where do you see value here?
Yeah, probably outside of the dollar, we'd be looking at things like the Australian dollar, actually. There's a lot of value there just because the domestic story is strong and there's potential for some hedge changes next year. At the end of the day, though, the data in the U.S. is still holding up, and so it's hard to see a real big sell-off coming for the dollar. Even if Harris wins and the dollar sells off, it probably will be momentary, and the dollar could probably rally back.
Do you have G10, it's not, but China, how do you affect a China trade given the Congress coming out, presume fiscal support, more help, et cetera? How does Citigroup affect a China belief?
Yeah, I mean, the key question is going to be what kind of tariffs do we get if we do, in fact, get a Trump presidency? And to offset that, what kind of stimulus are we going to get from the Chinese side? And we do have the standing committee meeting on November 8th. So there will potentially be a lot of volatility around the currency. But very simply, if Trump wins, we expect dollar CNH to move higher. If Harris wins, we can actually see dollar CNH more stable.
The pound sterling, what's the call there? How do you feel about sterling right here?
Structurally, we like it. We think there's opportunity for investors, which have been very underweight the UK since Brexit, to start moving assets back into the UK. Gilt yields look somewhat attractive here. So we see potential for a stronger sterling, especially against the euro into next year. But in the short term, it's not trading to its domestic fundamentals. It's trading to concerns around the budget and across the U.S.
One final question. You do technicals, which we do a lot here in surveillance. Technicals on radio really work. and the answer here is, when someone says the vector in the dollar is strong dollar, is there an established trend? I call it soup, or is it technically just soup where the dollar is right now?
If we pull out far enough, there is a very clear trend since the great financial crisis for a stronger dollar. And in fact, the U.S. has been the outperforming economy in the global developed markets.
So does it get you on yen through 160? I mean, Gartman's framing it for gold, but that's Gartman making gold chat. Can you, as a major bank, frame out a fan distribution that gets a yen back out over 160?
That would require a much higher U.S. 10-year yield. And given that the Fed is already in a cutting cycle and that in general we're seeing a bit of a slowdown in the U.S., it's hard to see that absent some kind of fiscal shock. Now, that's not impossible given, we have a potential red wave coming, but it's hard for us to see that. We actually think the yen can strengthen into next year.
Like Paul said, you're everywhere. Where are you based for Citigroup? Are you in like Dubai or?
I'm in New York, but I've worked all over for Citi.
They're everywhere. I'm actually, if you want to go trade some obscure currency, they got
No,
your
you
first
read
call.
you read Dan Tobin's resume, and it's like the romance of FX and big bank. I mean, he came out of Villanova and he's sipping tea in Mayfair. What's that about?
I know.
Well, Citi is the FX bank, and London is a place.
What was your first day like in Citigroup? Was it like the TV show industry?
Oh no! It was it was actually great. I've loved working there. I've been there for over a decade. I did leave and I came back because I loved it so much.
Great, Dan Tobin. Don't be a stranger. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
With Citigroup, he's had a G10 FX at Citigroup, and we'll monitor it for you. I mean, we make light of it, but Paul, tomorrow morning, but in Japan.
Yep.
7 p.m. tonight is their morning where they start getting active with the thermometer of the Japanese
currency
yen.
traders at Citi in Tokyo, they'll be
I'll
up and running.
I'll be heading for the surveillance beauty rest, but I guess I'll look at dollar yen.
Yeah.
See what's
you
like.
need to trade, call them up.
We need to get the markets open.
We do.
I mean, that's all there is
That's
to
Lisa's
it.
job.
Futures up 8, yes. Well, she's done a good job. VIX is in 22 into 21.86. The yield space is higher yields. 2-year yield up 2 basis points, 10-year 3. Paul's looking at the 30-year mortgage. I mean, do you get an election bounce in real estate?
I don't know. No
think so.
refinancing in the pipeline.
Oil, flat pretty much. American oil, $72.30 a barrel. Gold up $9. Stay with us on this election day. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And the opening bell report brought to you by JP Morgan Asset Management. Stay informed on today's fastest growing investment vehicle with a new guide to ETFs. Visit jpmorgan.com/ETFs insights to learn more. All right, we got a big week for markets. Not only do we have a U.S. presidential election, but we also have a Fed decision on interest rates. And odds are policymakers are going to opt for a quarter-point rate on Thursday. We'll see, but let's get to the markets as we get things open on this election day. We'll start the S&P 500 up about 0.2%, 11 points at 5,000. 29,723. Over to the Dow right now, little change, down about 2 points at 41,792. The NASDAQ up 0.4%, 74 points at around 18,255. We have the 2-year yield at 4.18%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.32%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude $75 a barrel, WTI crude $72 a barrel. We have spot gold at $2,748 an ounce. We have the dollar is weaker. The dollar is weaker. Japanese yen stronger. We have euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up more than 3.5% right now at 69,000. At the open, checking with shares of Palantir up 14%. Also to note, shares of Nvidia up 1%. Same for Tesla right now. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it, Lisa Mateo. This is a real joy. He's in Michigan. He's at the Northwest Activity Center. And, Election Day, everything's canceled. But tomorrow, when Romaine Bostick goes back for the, Wednesday morning election reports, Paul, he's got Seniors in Motion while we're on air.
Oh, nice.
And then Mind, Body, and Soul
I'm
at
there.
9:15 a.m. It's a sensitive thing like you'd expect from Romaine. And then there's the Walking Club, which he's going to need tonight at 1 a.m. when he leaves Harry's Bar and Grill. Joining us, the stars of Stage, Screen, and the Close on Bloomberg TV. Seriously, in Detroit, Romaine Bostick. Romaine, what are you looking at in the state of Michigan on this election day?
Well, I think probably the biggest takeaway that you're going to learn after we get through tonight is voter turnout, Tom. Already more than half of the registered voters in this state have already cast their ballot. That was prior to today. Early voting and absentee ballots. This was the first time, the first election cycle that we've had early voting in the state of Michigan, and
Right.
folks really did take advantage of it. We should point out 3.3 million people have already cast their votes prior to today. 5.6 million had cast their votes in the 2020 election. Most election officials I've spoken to expect the numbers to exceed what we saw in 2020.
Romaine, I'm going to go north from Detroit. I pick it up in Flint, Michigan with, the whole auto industry death, the water, and up to Saginaw. That's Dan Kildee, his family, literally back to JFK. He retires in the 8th District up to Saginaw is a perfect example of a district up in the air.
Yeah, to say it's up in the air might be an understatement. Of course, Kildee stepping aside because of health reasons. Of course, a big stronghold there. This is not necessarily going to go in the Democrats' favor. Right now, the polling seems to suggest that Republican Young is actually leading Christian McDonald-Rivet by just maybe 2 or 3 percentage points here, so still within the margin of error. But this is a community, these broader communities in that 8th congressional district that have really been hit hard by the downturn in manufacturing, the loss of automotive jobs to other parts of the nation as well as other parts of the world, and they are voting on those issues in a big way. I should also point out, Tom, that immigration is actually a big topic of conversation here, as well as foreign policy, at least when it comes to tariffs. These are 3 big voting issues that voters have told me that they are going to be going to the polls to decide on this morning.
Romaine, as Tom mentioned, you're at the Northwest Activity Center in Detroit, Michigan. Tell us about the activity level so far this morning. How's it been? Has it been running smoothly?
It's been running very smoothly. The polls opened at 7, and believe it or not, there were almost no lines. In fact, right behind me, the people who are in this, if you showed up right now, you can walk in and probably be out of here in about 5 minutes or less. That is largely because early voting, particularly here in Detroit City and in Wayne County, where more than 40% of the electorate had already cast their votes prior to today. Security here, relatively, I guess, normal, if you will. There has been some concerns here about the potential for unrest overnight, depending on the results of this election. But the community I'm in, this is a pretty close-knit community, a working-class community, predominantly black, and a Democratic stronghold that is most likely to vote for Harris in overwhelming numbers.
And Romaine, again, being in Detroit today, in the great state of Michigan, what are some of the key issues for the folks of Detroit as they go to the polls today?
Well, based on the polling coming in, it was basically economy was number 1, reproductive rights, and immigration. But a big wild card here is actually foreign policy. And you're going to find that if you go just a little bit west of where I'm at, into the communities of Dearborn, Michigan, and Dearborn Heights, or just a little bit east into Hamtramck, these are predominantly Muslim majority cities, Arab majority cities, and they are very upset right now about the Biden and Harris administration's handling of the war in Gaza. Most of the discussions I've had with them is that they do plan to make a protest vote, and that protest vote is not necessarily going to go to Trump, but to a third-party candidate, Jill Stein, who amongst the Arab and Muslim American population is polling at 40%.
Romaine, you more than anyone at Bloomberg carries the water of corporate earnings. On the close, you're doing this earnings season. It's the meat and potatoes of what you do. With all your interviews, with all your perspective on corporations in America, who do CEOs want to win?
Well, that's a tough question, Tom. I will say this. Most of the CEOs and most of the executives we talk to, I think what they really want is to have someone who's going to have stewardship of this economy and is going to do it in a predictable way. Where I'm at here, I mean, obviously, this is still a huge manufacturing state. I think it ranks something like 6th in the nation overall. Excuse me, I take that back, 3rd in the nation overall. Only Indiana and Louisiana, I think, have a larger manufacturing base. It's also a huge union state as well, ranking 6th in the nation in terms of private employer union membership here. And so they are voting a lot here on economic issues, not just on manufacturing jobs, but really on job training, on education, to kind of prepare this state, and particularly Detroit and Wayne County, for a future there's probably going to be a little less dependent on manufacturing, and a lot of the voters want to know where they're going to fit into that process.
Romaine, just give us the logistics of voting in Detroit and in the greater state of Michigan. When do polls close this evening?
They will be closing at 8 p.m. tonight. Remember, most of the state of Michigan is on Eastern time. There are a few areas in the Upper Peninsula that are on Central time, so that will be 1 hour later for you folks out on the East Coast. I did have a chance to catch up with the head of the election boards, both in Detroit and in Wayne County. They're expecting a much smoother process than what we saw in 2020. Of course, that was the pandemic year where most of the voting was done by absentee ballots. And of course, that led to a lot of late nights, in fact, a long week of trying to tally up the votes. They're not expecting a repeat of that. Detroit officials say they do expect to have a result for Detroit City tonight. Wayne County officials are expecting to have a result to announce at some point early or in midday on Wednesday. And the full state of Michigan is also anticipating that they should have a result to share with the public by Wednesday or Thursday at the latest.
Romaine, Michael Barr wants to know, at Harry's Bar and Grill, are you going with the Detroit Greek healthy salad? Or are you going with the smokestack burger, spicy burger sauce, cherry wood, smoked bacon, smoked Gouda, lettuce, and they throw a tomato on to be healthy? Which are you going with for lunch, Romaine?
Well, I was going to go with the Tanqueray and tonic, but I think what you just said actually sounds a little bit better, Tom. Look, I mean, we've been running around all day. Everyone's given us a lot of recommendations, Coney Island dogs and all the different cuisines here. I have to tell you, Tom, I'm not sure any of that's going to sit well on my stomach, given how late we have to stay up tonight.
Romaine Bostick, thank you so much. And it will be a long night in Michigan. Romaine Bostick, seriously, folks, Northwest Activity Center at a polling center, not so busy in Detroit because of the way we've changed. This write-in ballot, I'm still, my head, Paul, is not wrapped around this still. It was, I felt strange putting the thing in the envelope, getting the little barcode in the window. And it's just...
And you drop it in the box and you hope it gets there.
And the kids are like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But we all learned, I guess, back in 2020 that it can be done.
Romaine Bostick there and David Gers in Philadelphia. Tyler Kendall, I believe, down in Florida as well, West Palm Beach, with maybe what we'll hear from Mr. Trump at some point tonight. And the vice president, it will be at Howard University.
Okay, in Washington.
In Washington, I believe, is the schedule. We've got so much more coming up. Our election coverage, we do so with a NASDAQ up 0.7%, nicely over 20,000 levels. S&P 500, 5,700. Dow, just below 42,000. The VIX, 21.18. It's a better tape now. What do you do, Paul? Do you, get out front of the countdown clocks.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of the folks we talk to, I mean, they're trying to hedge some of the risk if they can. But I think a lot of folks we talk to, they're just looking past this thing and focusing back on the fundamentals. Where's the Fed going to be? Where are corporate earnings going to be?
Can you see it? Could you get me 100,000 shares of Apple? I know which way the Aleutian Islands are going.
Right. Exactly. So I mean, it's gonna be crazy, but we'll be here and we'll get it all worked out.
Stay with Bloomberg Radio. We will do data checks today through a market on the move, and it is on the move right now. Again, futures, the market, the Dow up 106 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. In the small town of Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, and town in quotes, the 6 votes cast overnight show a 3-3 tie between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Pennsylvania is critical in this race. Yesterday, Harris and Trump held competing rallies in the battleground state.
Our people-powered movement reflects a simple and undeniable truth that we are all in this together.
I do believe it is too big to rig. I think it's too big to rig. They'll try. And they are trying, though.
Control of Congress is at stake this election. Races for the House and Senate will determine which party holds the majority and the power to boost or block a new president's agenda. More with Bloomberg's Amy Morris in Washington.
Democrats' chances are better in the House than in the Senate. They need a net gain of just 4 seats to hand the Speaker's gavel to Hakeem Jeffries of New York. The first results election night could come from Virginia, with each party having a pickup opportunity. And Republicans have sought to capitalize on voter discontent on issues like inflation and immigration, targeting open race seats of retiring Democrats in Michigan and incumbents in states including New Mexico and Pennsylvania. Both Louisiana and Alabama have newly reconfigured majority black districts that favor Democrats. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, Florida, Arizona, and 7 other states are asking voters whether they want to enshrine a right to abortion in their state constitutions. And finally, the co-founder of the world's largest home improvement retailer has died. Bernard Marcus co-founded Home Depot along with Arthur Blank and Kenneth Langone in 1978. The company announced Marcus's death on its website, calling him a master merchant and a genius with customer service. Bernard Marcus was 95. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Home Depot, from the beginning, 1981 is where Bloomberg data goes to per year, Paul. 25.75%.
Wow.
Per year.
Yep. How about that?
Dividends reinvested and all that. What a triumph for those. Maybe we'll get Ken Langone on here in the coming days if we can. I got to go back to Detroit. We just had important reporting Bostic.
Yep.
To end up at Harry's Bar and Grill.
Nice.
Joining us now on the cuisine of Detroit. I mean, you look at the smokestack burger at Harry's, I'm sorry, Michael Barr. I mean, that's a place to attend to watch the Lions win this weekend.
I like the way you ended that sentence. Yeah, Harry's, I get a lot of great
30-year
eateries
institution.
There. Yeah. Yeah, if I remember the Harry's, it used to be the old Harry's.
Yeah.
And it moved, and so now they moved to the new location.
They fancied it up.
Yeah. So.
Thank
Good
you.
food.
Michael Barr with our Detroit coverage there. No doubt advising Romaine Bostic. Joe Matthews said to me last night, where should I eat? I sent him over to Loy, Greek restaurant, 58th Street. I said, go see Maria over at Loy. I haven't talked to Joe yet. I haven't had a Joe Matthews sighting. Speaking of that, our election coverage, Kaylee Lines, Joe Matthews at 5 p.m. Really important conversations to 7 p.m. And then Jonathan Farrow and Anne-Marie Horton join to take you through the evening. From New York City, Bloomberg's surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got stocks on the rise, the dollar weakening, and this as voting continues in the U.S. presidential election. Shares of Trump Media and Technology, they are up about 14%. We have the NASDAQ up 0.6%, 114 points. We have the Dow up 0.2%, 88 points. The S&P 500 up 0.4%, or 25 points. I want to take a little deeper look as we look at the IMAP feature of your terminal right now. The biggest boost coming from consumer discretionary right now. We switch to that and we see automobiles, components, and then a little bit further we see automobiles, automobile manufacturers, and at the top we have Tesla. Its shares up more than 3.5%, followed by General Motors shares up more than 1%. Over to shares of Boeing. They are up they're down about 0.7%. Workers voted to accept that new labor contract. And Aramco reported third quarter net income missed while maintaining its dividend. And finally, sources say Chevron weighing a sale of its gas stations in Hong Kong. It could seek a valuation of about $400 million for the assets. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. And thank you so much, Lisa, for keeping the markets front and center for us here as we go all election all the time. Lisa Mateo with us tomorrow with the market reaction. We'll be there 7 a.m. Don't forget Nathan Hager and Karen Moscow. Earlier in the morning. You know, I said we need someone in Washington out of central casting.
Yep.
Who just looks the part. You know, with our election coverage, we're going to get to Zach Cohen in a minute. Here yesterday, someone with decades of experience, Bob Woodward.
He is a danger to the United States. Who's Donald Trump's national security advisor? His mouth. He will say whatever he wants, whatever springs in. That is the danger we face.
Bob Woodward yesterday, and thanks for the huge response to our conversation with Mr. Woodward, Trump supporters, to be blunt, upset, Harris supporters taking notes. Bob Woodward, the book is out, War. Zach Cohen joins us now on the war in Congress and in the Senate as well. And, you get a grizzled pro like Zach Cohen, and you don't, guess. You say, which one matters? For Zach Cohen, he's watching Wisconsin. What is the desperation of Tammy Baldwin? Gura spoke to her a few days ago. Zach Cohen, what is the desperation of Baldwin in Wisconsin this morning?
It seems to be Senator Tammy Baldwin, the Democrat from Wisconsin, one of the most vulnerable incumbents up for re-election, up there with John Tester of Montana and Sherrod Brown of Ohio, the chairman of the Banking Committee. But Wisconsin is a true toss-up race, really on a knife's edge, both at the presidential and at the Senate level, and there's a competitive House race there as well. Baldwin is up for re-election in probably her tightest race of her career against Eric Hovde, who's chairman and CEO of SunWest Bank based in Utah, formerly of California. Right. And he has spent over $20 million of his own money on this race and has really made it competitive.
Okay, but is this Green Bay and the Rust Belt? Is it, the cherubs at Madison? Hopefully they're going to show up for Baldwin. Or is it those suburbs, the WOW district, the WOW counties of Milwaukee?
I spent some time actually with Eric Hovde in those WOW counties and Waukesha County specifically, and so certainly that's been a major focus of his campaign as well as Baldwin's. The key for any Democrat statewide in Wisconsin is to juice your turnout in places like Milwaukee, in Madison, Dane County, the state capital, and trying to keep your margins down in more rural places. That's where I actually met up with Baldwin when I was on the campaign trail a couple of weeks ago. She was in Eau Claire in the far western part of the state, practically in Minnesota. And she has a history of being able to, maybe not win those more rural counties, but certainly win enough votes there to offset any potential Republican gains that would normally carry a statewide Republican. And so that's going to be one state to watch for sure, especially in that western part of the state, the most politically competitive part.
So, Zach, what's the most recent consensus, if there is any, on how the House will go and how the Senate will go?
The Senate is probably what we'll know first. The House is going to take a little longer to call, and I'll get to that in a second. As I mentioned, Montana, Ohio, West Virginia, all Republican-leading states where Democrats are defending seats. West Virginia is basically gone at this point, with Joe Manchin retiring and Jim Justice likely to replace him in that West Virginia seat. And that leaves the Senate at 50-50. And then Democrats are defending a lot of really competitive races in places like Montana and Ohio that Trump is expected to carry very handily tonight. And so that's going to make it very difficult for Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Democrat from New York to hold on to his very narrow majority. That being said, over on the House side, Republicans are defending some really tough seats in places like New York, in the Hudson Valley, or on Long Island, as well as in California. And it's in California where we could be waiting for a couple of days, if not weeks, for results in some of those Orange County races that could end up determining whether Speaker Mike Johnson gets to hold on to his gavel.
So is it simply because it's so evenly split? Why are these delays, which I guess we've become a little bit used to by now, why are they so pronounced here?
I always remember that in 2016, Trump was declared the winner over Hillary Clinton before the sun came up on Wednesday morning after Election Day. Fast forward to 2020, it took 4 days for the Associated Press to call Joe Biden's victory over Donald Trump that ushered him out of office. I don't expect it would take another 4 days this time around, just because mail-in balloting, which it does take longer to count, isn't going to be quite as pronounced as it was in 2020 when we were in the middle of a pandemic. But certainly mail-in balloting has become much more popular, and because mail-in ballots are harder to count, they take longer, it's a more arduous process. It does take time, especially in places like California, to count all those up and make sure you get the proper results.
Zach, I think this bears repeating. I mentioned it earlier, folks, long ago and far away in the 7 o'clock hour. I was weaned that 1960 was the mother of all close elections. The delta on Kennedy-Humphrey was 118,000. Trump winning, the delta was 78,000. Biden winning, the delta was 43,000. Do you predict, Zach, do you guess, Zach, that we'll see that same swing state differential so narrow as we saw in the last election?
Certainly the Bloomberg News Morning Console polling at this point has shown basically a tied race in all of the 7 swing states, in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which are going to take longer to count their votes than places like Florida, for instance. And so we'll certainly know the result very quickly if it's a blowout. But we're in this era of politics where voters are so polarized that it's going to be hard for any party to win a sort of durable, nationwide routes that we've seen in past elections. And the same goes for Congress, which is basically being decided by a couple of dozen races.
So you're at the Capitol Grill tonight, Zach. You're having your first beverage at 7 p.m. Georgia's closing. On the East Coast, which race will Zach Cohen focus on?
I'll be really curious to see what happens in Virginia. There's a race there between for Jen Kiggins, is the Republican running for re-election there against a fellow Navy veteran. And that's a real swing district. That's one that actually went to Republicans in 2022. I believe it's a Biden district and one he would have carried under those current lines in 2020. And because Virginia closes its polls so early, I believe in the 7 o'clock hour, that could be a bellwether for how the rest of the night goes.
Zach, wonderful. Thank you so much. Look forward to speaking to you, say, within the next 72 hours. Really driving granularity for us at Bloomberg Government. Paul, this market, NASDAQ up 0.9%.
Yeah.
Paul, what is the market saying?
Exactly. I think the market, we kind of a little bit of a move higher here. The futures were mixed, Tom, as we've been reporting all morning, but we've got the S&P
Look at
up
Big Dog up $3,000.
Exactly, up 4.4% at $70,000 per token. Matt Miller's a happy camper.
What does it mean?
Risk on? Does it mean people, I don't know if this is any referendum on the market here. I can't imagine. But we got the Fed coming up Thursday, Tom. We can't forget about that.
We go to our congestion correspondent, John Tucker. John, will the congestion tax debate in New York State, will it change? Will it be amended given the first Wednesday of November?
It may very well after the election. It may come up again because the MTA needs money, and it needs money pretty quickly to do a lot of projects.
Your congestion coverage this morning. We covered it all, Paul.
Yeah, I'll be on the subway today. Happy camper.
It's been a lot of fun. Major shout out to Michael Barr. He's feverish with his staff. Working on the granularity, the minutia of the elections. And we'll have a real focus for Bloomberg 1130 and our New York City coverage, our tri-state coverage tomorrow. Tonight, 5 p.m., Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lyons begins our election coverage. We've enjoyed looking at the nuances of Quincy Jones here. I'd forgotten all about this. He called up George Benson and said, we're doing one more song. Benson said, I don't want to do it. Quincy said, no, we're doing one more song, George. Pick up the guitar. George Benson with Quincy Jones. Give me the night. Vote today.